Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's been a little while. And as I said, once things started to happen, we would be back. Well, things are happening now. The team has congregated at the VMAC. They're on the practice field. They're doing things. The front office is doing things, making moves. Players are making career altering moves in some cases. And I am, as I try to be as often as I can, joined by Brandon of the Hawks Nest. How are you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm doing amazing. Can't keep the smile off my face since I've gotten this news this afternoon.
Yeah. It's been a very fruitful day to be a Seahawks fan. It's actually been, in terms of just general things happening, it's been a pretty fruitful week. Every day we've heard something like, "Wow, okay, this finally resolved itself. Finally resolved itself. We got to the end of that plot line."
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to run through all of that. First, I want to say I actually just like an hour ago hit 9,000 subscribers on YouTube. So I want to say thank you to everybody for helping make that happen.
Well done, Brandon. Get it.
So obviously, almost everybody in the chat right now is probably subbed. You guys helped with that. So I appreciate that. But that's actually not even the biggest thing that's happened today to my channel because we finally got to the end of the DK Metcalf contract drama plotline. They finally wrapped it up after about a day and a half of training camp. They decided it's time for this guy to come in, build some chemistry with Drew Lock, continue to build chemistry with Geno Smith, and he is now going to be a Seahawk for the foreseeable future. So 3 years, $72 million, 58 and a point, I think 58 and a quarter guaranteed, and 30 million signing bonus, which is a record for a wide receiver. So right off the jump, let's start with that. How do you feel about this one, Brandon?
Very often, you find yourself in positions with deals or trades, Brendan, where fans want hot takes for you to go hot or cold, love it or hate it. And you often, I know you're this way too, where you're more in the place of a gray nuanced area of there's some good or some bad, or mostly good or mostly bad. To me, this is a contract, in my estimation, that there is nothing but good on, that this is a black and white type situation of it's purely good as I look at this contract and all of the ways around by which I look at it. I don't know how you can pull this apart really in any way, shape, or form. You're getting a player through his prime. He's going to be 27 by the time that this thing contract expires. So you're getting the best years of DK Metcalf. You're getting a guy who's played every single game. So I don't worry about the guaranteed bonus money aspect of it because he's a guy that's been very resilient on the football field. And receivers, unlike running backs, aren't ones that are going to necessarily break down mid-20s. So I have a lot of faith in him holding up. And then the final thing for me, Brendan, is looking at the contract. It is $19 million average per year at the end of the day. A.J. Brown just signed a $25 million a year deal with the Eagles. You got him, in my opinion, on this deal at a $6 million minimum discount. Say nothing of really the next guy up should be due the $26 million, not 25. Next guy up gets $1 million more. That's the way the NFL works. I don't come up with those rules. That's just how it plays out with these contracts at these positions. And the next guy who's up, who's due to be paid higher and set the market at the position. And instead of setting the market, he actually saved $6 million. I can see no way that you look at this deal and go, yeah, but there's this, but what? But what? That he gave us a discount. And when that Amazon money kicks in, Brendan, when we're sitting at $240 million of a cap in another year or two, this is going to look amazing.
Yeah, I was very surprised. I think it's a little bit more than the McLaurin deal. So it's almost like players are viewing the A.J. Brown contract as an aberration and they're not using that as the benchmark. It almost feels like McLaurin skipped over it when he was negotiating his deal, and now Metcalf is looking at McLaurin as the template more than A.J. Brown. So maybe that A.J. Brown contract is just bad. I didn't think much of it at the time, but maybe.
Well, I also think and I don't have Terry McLaurin's contract details in front of me, but I did have A.J. Brown's brought up in front of me because I was looking at it today, just kind of comparing it back and forth, because I had that same question. How does this stay at that outlier versus what would happen with McLaurin? The thing that jumps out to me, though, in the A.J. Brown deal is, though he's getting the $25 million, Brendan, in basic terms, he went with the long money. DK went for the bird in the fist. Right? So DK went with there's the more guaranteed money. There's the more bonus money on the DK deal where he's got those built in if injury happens. Whereas AJ goes, I think I'm going to stay healthy enough to get paid through all the whole course of this contract, the full $100 million. Because AJ had only $23 million as a signing bonus and then $40 million guaranteed at signing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting how that's played out. But when you factor in the fact that the last year of his rookie deal is still appended to the start of the new deal, it's pretty sweet. So I don't have anything to really complain about with this deal either. I think it's a very good one. The 3 years thing, let's talk about that real quick here, because my first thought was it's a mixed bag. It's obviously Metcalf wants to re-enter free agency as soon as possible, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's also,
Yeah.
it's similar to what they've done historically, though. They use the final year of a deal like that, and then they'll chop on 3 years. So they've done it on a lot of contracts in the recent history. You stated the 4 years of the deal because as we found in recent history, if you look at these 5-year contracts, sorry to interrupt you, by the way, Brendan,
No,
we haven't
go
done
ahead.
this in a month. I'm a little rusty. But if you look at these contracts that historically, that in recent history, not 20 years back, let's just look in the last 6 years at contracts of players who are given 5th and 6th year deals, and they're outperforming those deals, or they're performing up to the standards of those deals still in year 3 and year 4. They're not going to wait through the back end of that contract to not get paid at that point. They're coming back to be re-upped anyway. So this to me is the Seahawks saying, look, rather than playing the silly agent game where we inflate the numbers on the back end of your contract so it makes your agent look good and it's money you're never really going to truly see, let's just take that off the books. Let's get your guaranteed money up. You'll get back at the same time you would have if we put those falsely 5th and 6th year deals on the deal anyway. So let's just cut through the chase. And I think that's what they did here a little bit.
Yeah, I can't help but think about the fact that we did give Jamal the 4 years, though. And let's pretend we didn't hear any news about Jamal today when we talk about this. We'll talk about the Jamal news later that we got today. But even removing that, we did give Jamal the 4 years plus the last year of his rookie deal, correct?
I don't know that it was that way. I thought you utilized the last year of his deal. It's a 4-year deal in total, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I believe it ended up being 4 years plus the year that he was already on. So if that's the case, that's kind of interesting that you would do it for Jamal. I know Jamal per year costs a lot less because he's a safety, but he still costs top of his position.
Yeah, I'm just double checking because it does sound somewhat right in how you're saying this. Yeah, because they took the $1 million base down on the first. So I think that it is a little indicative. They did it differently there, it looks like. Yeah, so you have the 1, 2, 3, 4-year deal. So yeah, they added on the 5th year there. I think what they did there with Jamal that might be the difference on that one, though, is that Jamal is setting the record-breaking contract, right? So DK is not looking to push his positional market as high as the Jamal Adams deal, where Jamal was like, I want to be paid like I'm a pass rusher, right? You had to bring Jamal off $20 million a year to get him to sign where you wanted him to sign, where DK looks a lot more realistic in his requirements.
Yeah, maybe it's because Jamal knows his body is not going to age very well, so he's not concerned about hitting the market again in a few years. So he's like, I want to get all that I can.
I'm getting Percy Harvin vibes, man. I'm getting Percy Harvin vibes here with the guy.
Yeah, so the 3 years thing was interesting, but it does grant you more flexibility depending on where things go now. If you hit on your next quarterback and you get here in a couple years from now, and you're like, we've got the next Montana to Rice combo with QBX to Metcalf, then you're going to be really motivated to keep Metcalf. Now, you might not be able to, but you'll have the opportunity to try that. But if you don't, let's say you end up with quarterback bust X, and you don't have a quarterback in a few years, and you're looking at blowing it up, then you can just trade him or let him go or whatever. And it's easier to do that because it is a 3-year deal.
Agreed, because you're basically through the course of all of the bonus money and stuff by the time of that last year of that deal. So the dead money hit is really substantially lowered at that point. And with, it'll be easy to eat. And then you're getting back a little bit better returns because of that at that point too, in total. So yeah, you have flexibility on this deal to sign him or trade him at that point. He's an asset now on the team as it stands, and you're getting it for cheap over the next couple of years. Just one of the reasons why I say with it, Brendan, is the more you analyze it and turn it from every view and look through every prism of the ball here, every prism has something that's really encouraging or good to see about the deal and hard to really, shake much of a stick at. It's just like, it's where do you really, pick the nit there? Is like, we should have got him for 16. We should have got him for less than what did the Jaguars receiver go for? The one they signed in free agency. Yeah, we should have. He's worse than Christian Kirk. We should have got him for less than that. I mean, where DK is getting paid $2 million more a year per on average than Christian Kirk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when you put it that way, it's kind of interesting. Although I guess it's the same for McLaurin and will probably be the same for Debo. They'll have their final years of their rookie deals rolled into their extension. So the extension will be like 23, 24, 25, but the actual contract is going to be 19, 20 a year.
Right. I agree. And I think you're right about Debo doing the same thing. I think DK and Terry's done, because Debo definitely is in that. I'm worried about long-term my health here at 29 with the way these guys have used me. I might be kind of pretty stiff, pretty sore. So give me my guaranteed money in my deal. And I'm guessing on Debo's deal, he's going to be pushing, well over 20 million. And you're going to see him probably sitting at, like you said, 58 million guaranteed on DK. I bet he gets more into that range of like 65, 70 in guarantees, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, they can't trade him now, so we know it's coming. It's not like they're just going to let him sit at home all season. And he hasn't made that much money. He's not going to want to do that too.
Right. Well, and again, because you've used him too, you've increased that sense of urgency. DK can sit here and look at this and be like, yeah, I'll get back to the trough again in 4 years. I'll get another bite at this apple. And there might even be one more bite, right? He'd come outside 4-year contract, be only 31 at that point, and get 3 major contracts throughout his time if he's looking at through this. If I'm Debo and I'm running bubble screens and fly sweeps every other play, I'm having linebackers smack me in the mouth, I'm not going to last through this for 12, 13 years in this career. No way. And that's why he's making so much hay about the fact he doesn't want to do that stuff anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's understandable. It's kind of an interesting situation, but I get it. And I think there was some sort of understanding between the Niners and him that he's not going to have to do that anymore. So that should alleviate some of that. But it feels kind of weird to have a player who can do this particular thing very well and then not do that thing. It must feel very unnatural to somebody like Shanahan.
Well, let's face it, it's not ideal for them, right? They're saying, we don't want to trade you because we're not getting your trade capital, but now we don't get to use you in the best way we would like to use you to get the most out of you. And I think he can do traditional receiver things, Brendan, but I think he's a very good receiver. I think he's a great gadget type receiver, which has just the combination of those two is what makes him so dynamic. And you remove one of those elements like that, you are removing his value while at the same time you're paying a maximum value on the front end, especially if those guarantees are high, up around that $20, $25 million area. And that's a conundrum. And quite frankly, you're right. Because as we saw last year, when you lose that one guy who does it in your offense, who's built to do it, receiver, running back, kind of like middle build guy, you don't necessarily have a guy behind him that can do it anywhere near to what the frontline guy can do. And then that removes that fly sweep element. And Shanahan's, more so even than our offense, the motion-based stuff in his offense is what makes that running game really fully work, is the pre-snap motion stuff with some of the post-snap complexity that he installs.
It kind of makes me think of back in Dwight Howard's prime when he was a dominant pick and roll player, but he wanted to be a post-up player because he thought he was the next Hakeem, and he was not that good of a post-up player, but he kept demanding to be that guy. And it's just kind of like, can't you just do the stuff you're good at? So
yeah, I agree. And it's like, the pick, you go up and lay the pick, your body takes a little bit of thing, but if you're down low, you're just really kind of banging behind on the, you're kind of the context is not as bad theoretically. So maybe you're holding your body. It's kind of similar reason I'm saying that Debo's making this choice, where they're leaning into it as much for the decision of how it will prolong the career and protect their body more so than they're making the decision on what's best in a big way. And that's, he will still be effective, but when you talk about 25 million at that point on a receiver, I need you to be pulling in 90 catches and 1,200 yards a year at that point, right? Minimum. Like you've got to be hitting those marks for that kind of money, because that's a huge chunk of my cap.
Yeah. One last thing about the DK stuff. So we don't know how the contract is structured yet from year to year. They haven't released that yet. At least I haven't seen it yet.
Right.
And because this year is what it is in terms of it kind of being a throwaway year, we're probably not going to be that good. We're probably going to have a losing record, and all those things. Would you like to see this contract maybe get front loaded, where a lot of the money is in the first year, because this is not the year where we're going to go up against the cap? We're not going to make some desperation trade at the deadline to try to scrape together another couple wins. Would you like to see something like that? Because that's, I think the Chiefs kind of did that with Kelsey. They actually moved some of his money to the front this year because they had it, and they felt like, you know what, let's just push some of that pain into the present.
It's a great comparison you make there, because then I would ask you on the other side of that, do you think maybe the Chiefs are looking at that in retrospect and saying, that wasn't necessarily the best decision for us now that we're learning they can't get a contract done with Orlando Brown at left tackle.
Would $3 million have made the difference? Because did you see the offer that was on the table for Orlando Brown?
Or no, what were they throwing down?
It was like 6 years, $140 million, and he said no.
Yeah, he's trying to. He's ridiculous there. He's up $25 million a year.
Yeah, I think he wanted more guaranteed, which is understandable. But how can you get offered $140 million and turn it down?
6 years, 140s. That's well over 20 plus a year at that point. I agree with you. I mean, you're not Trent Williams, man. You know what I mean? Like Trent earned that contract he got last year to set the market where he set at the left tackle position. And he's far and away the best left tackle in the sport right now, even at his age. So Orlando's a very good left tackle. Frankly, I think he's at his best. Let me just be frank. Right side's really his best side. He's playing out of position too on top of that. But you're right. I mean, maybe the $3 million wouldn't have factored in, but I have to think of it in these terms. Why I asked that question, Brandon, is because to your question, it's where I stand on this is I go flexibility. Flexibility. Let me be in a situation to watch how things play out, maintain flexibility in order that if something crazy happens, if something out of the sorts goes on, I can strike. And I don't think that there's a huge benefit to front loading the contract with them here in the respect of, number one, we're sitting on a good amount of cap space next offseason as it stands right now, but it's been a little bit reduced with some of the contracts we've given out. It's not what it was when we started out kind of this offseason. We're really looking and go, well, like the most amount of cap space in 2023. It's not. So you do have to kind of keep an eye on keeping that down. But then beyond that, I say, no, keep it down at the lowest area this year. Hell, take it down to a $1 million, $1.5 million base, put the bonus money on top of it and ride that way for maximum flexibility. So that if this team comes out through the first 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and they surprise everybody and blow everybody's mind and they're 4-1, you can then go out there and strike on a potential deal that could really upgrade your team down the stretch at that point in a substantial way. And you're not, we front loaded the contract instead and we got ourselves a little bit stuck.
Okay, that's pretty fair. It's just a consideration that I had because of the position we're in this year.
I get where you're coming from with it. I just look at it like if the move's not there to be made, then save the money and then just roll it over into next year's cap. So you still end up getting it back one way or another at that point. It's only if this one awesome thing happens where you're midway year through the year and things are just popping off.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. The fact that cap rolls over does help. And also, I've said this before, and it bears repeating, there is a diminishing return with cap space. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have $200 million in cap space and you can just go, we'll sign everyone. That doesn't happen. I think that there's like a level of understanding how cap space really works in the NFL that you as a fan have to work to get to. Mm-hmm. Like at first, when you first start watching football, you don't even know there is a salary cap. You don't really understand it. And then you look at it, and then after a few years, you might start to understand it a little bit, but you just look at it in terms of numbers. Oh, this number is big. I wish this number was smaller. When you really start to follow the NFL for a long period of time and you start to see how these teams work, you realize that it's not just as simple as this number big, I need to make it small, or this number small, I wish it was bigger. It's especially when it comes to superstar players. This is something I talk about sometimes on my streams, where when you hand out big contracts to players, the remedy for that on the other side is just to draft well. It's not about getting every single player on your team to take less money than they deserve. The remedy is to draft well, and you can have these big superstar monster contracts. You can fill in the gaps with the draft picks. That's way more important than negotiating for $1 million extra dollars.
Right. Agreed. I mean, that's your ultimate value because you have the cheap club control in a lot of cases. And it can be expensive on the first round side of it, but second, third round picks, especially when they're performing early, that's maximum value, right? That's how you would like to be able to stack your team up fully, to have the flexibility then to make those big swing moves to top things off. You don't want to get in the place where you're making big swing moves to fill out the roster is kind of, I think, the bottom line on that. 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having 200, like this ridiculous amount of cap space is a great way to just end up overpaying players who really don't deserve it, like Christian Kirk got overpaid.
Right. Which the Jaguars have done back-to-back seasons now. They have a certain amount of money to spend. They have to spend it. There's a floor in football. They're trying to reach that floor. So now they're giving out money that they don't necessarily want to. They're not in a position to win right now, yet they're giving out contracts as though that this is like, oh, this guy will fill out the wide receiver roster just fine. So you want flexibility in the future. You want to be able to get out from under bad contract or from contracts that could end up being bad, and that, you don't want a lot of dead money, and those kind of things are what I more concentrate on now as much as anything, Brendan. I also think we're in a unique moment here where we've had this slight moment of depression the previous year with the $188 million cap that now comes back up a little bit with some of the increases, but then you start to really see the injection increases coming in the next couple of years, which will change this in a way that's, you and I even are going to have to do some sort of scheduling to sort of catch up to the new numbers and the new deals and how this then affects it. And guys now who say, I need to get paid now because the cap went up 40 million per year this year, and that's the other part that goes into this. So you're right. It does. There's a lot of layers of the cap, and that's getting more complicated with differences between bonus money and guarantees and the way they're avoidable years. They're finding all these other ways now to kind of make it even more complex.
Mm-hmm. Real quick here, D Nugget, thank you for the $1.99 drop cheese on Brando and Brendan. I like it.
Hell yeah, brother.
You should definitely do that. I like it when you guys do that.
Thank you, D Nugget.
Garth Knight, thank you for the $5. Jamal Adams is the most talented player on this team according to draft position. I don't care if he has a pirate claw in his hand, he's a leader. Well, I guess now would be a good time to talk about Jamal a little bit, because we couldn't just be completely happy today, could we?
No, it's got to be, even when our pure happiness, there's got to be some little dark cloud over on the side that we've got to keep an eye on.
Right. So let's talk about this one a little bit. Jamal Adams. He practiced yesterday. Everything seemed fine, but something didn't feel right. And now he is getting his hand examined because something doesn't feel the way it should. And Carroll was unclear on how long of a process this could be. He also did not answer whether or not this would be a surgery situation. So we don't really know where we are right now here, but this is going to definitely start to really agitate some people, because Jamal is one of the poster childs right now on this team for not meeting expectations. And this was supposed to be his first full off season, and apparently it's not going to be, but we don't know how much he's going to miss yet. What do you got here, man?
Well, it's definitely rounding in, and you look through Seahawks franchise history, we're not a team that's actually smitten with a large amount of bad, horrific trades that you look at and you go, man, the team with that trade, we actually usually tend to be out on the better end of it. The Rick Meyer deal, the Joey Galloway deal, kind of go down the line of it. We usually end out okay. And you've got the Percy Harvin one, which certainly the Vikings got at the end of the day, probably the better end, though Percy Harvin might have been the guy to help seal us on that Super Bowl too. And he helped us win a couple games that year. So even if he provided us that in that 1 year to help us get that trophy once, it's kind of like, I go, well, it's at least a wash there. This one, though, is going to stand out, I think, far and away as the worst trade in Seahawks history. And Jamal can maybe recoup some of this, but I have worried all off season, if not maybe that he's at a point of being broken down a little bit at this point. And certain players just fall apart at different ages. And the fact that these are injuries he's sustaining that are not just one-off injuries, but are injuries that have occurred over and over and over again, to the point that he's had 2 of his fingers fused this offseason together, which is pretty major. I've not heard of football players actively getting fingers fused as they're playing. That's a new thing to me. Add on to that the shoulder injuries that he's had going back to high school. So he's had multiple years back-to-back with shoulder injuries, and he had it happen to him in high school. Again, warning. And I think that, Brendan, it's about football to me is a little bit, as you watch it through the years and you grow in your wisdom with it. I think that there are kind of learn lessons and rules, and then you can learn to kind of pick when teams go wrong if you sort of operate off those rules and lessons. If you're going to operate from desperation and you're going to operate from fear in your decision-making, you are likely to make the wrong decision. And it sounds like straightforward for me to say that and easy of, oh yeah, that goes without saying. But you watch teams over and over again operate from that stance. In Seahawks' case with Jamal Adams, Brendan, he was the second year in a row they had done it. The problem is that they had the good returns off Jadeveon Clowney the previous year from falling into that same trap of, oh, we'll draft an LJ Collier and he'll be ready to roll. Oh, not ready to roll, go get Jadeveon. Oh, we'll draft Darrell Taylor, he'll be ready to roll day 1. Oh, let's go get safety positions a little week 2. Oh yeah, We'll get Jamal. He'll handle the safety problems we have, and he'll fix our problems with our pass rush. But you're not making that thing as an aggressive, like foresight move in the offseason. You're doing it the last moment as training camp breaks because you're panicking, because you've realized you've not done enough to address a position of real need on your team, especially when pass rush was what made that old 4-3 under defense go because you didn't like the blitz. And so when I come back to what draw this, I'm being long-winded, sorry, but the long-winded answer, this is just, you can't make these choices and decisions out of desperation. If you're going to be aggressive, attack aggressively and smartly. Don't attack aggressively. And man, we might not have any pass rush this year. We got to do just something. That's how you end up making that kind of dumb trade.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Or you could just give up a 7th round pick for Carlos Dunlap. That worked out pretty good for us.
Well, that's where it's find that value. Quandre Diggs for a 5th rounder the year before, or you're right, or 2 years before. Those deals are out there to be had. And why those deals work for them, Brendan, is there wasn't a market for Carlos Dunlap at that time. There wasn't a market for Quandre Diggs, but they were going to upgrade your team from where you were at from a positional standpoint, most definitely. And you're getting him for minimum cost at that point. Instead with Jamal, that's a hot commodity at that time, coming off the 2 All-Pros, coming off being a guy on the rise as far as NFL is concerned. You're going to have to compete with other teams for him. So that means you have to give up more assets. I think that just, again, you're not operating from just a calm, smart decision-making process at that point. It's more of the chaotic, holy hell, we got to do something. And I think over and over again, that just proves to get you into trouble. Where are you at on it?
I mean, look, the trade was bad. There's no getting around that at this point, obviously, right? Like, even at this point, if Jamal Adams wins Defensive Player of the Year, it's still bad because at this point, you could have just signed him in free agency probably, or made a trade with the Jets for a franchise tag Jamal Adams that is for a lot less than what you gave up.
Right.
You're talking about maybe like 1 1st round pick now instead of 2, maybe even less. I don't know, especially if he had started to break down the last 2 years the way he did here.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I will stand by the fact that Jamal Adams is a fantastic player when he is healthy, but it's starting to look like that may never happen. There have been other cases of players who start breaking down early and their career is just over before you know it. I don't really know what to expect at this point, but this is now in assuming that this keeps going, the 3rd off season that he's missed at least sometime. And last year was because of his own volition, because he was doing the hold-in, which I get. But now that it's actually come back to hurt the team, I'm not really going to be as forgiving of it. So I don't know. It's unfortunate because I do believe this new defense, you're going to see the best version of Jamal Adams if he can get on the field.
Yeah. I'm with you in that you see him I don't have any questions about Jamal if he's on the field. I'm not one of those people that pick at his coverage. I know that he's been played out of position. Your new defensive coordinator told you so when he was hired. So this isn't, armchair Brandon over here saying that. That's your defensive coordinator said that we weren't using him right. I know they'll use him right this year. I know he will succeed in that position. Thing I don't know is the health. And I've been worried about all offseason, and it just continues to reinforce that worry as far as him being able to really be able to sustain out there on that football field in the long term. And it's sad because a lot of the changes you've made this offseason are at the center of it to better take advantage of him and his skill set.
Right. And I look back at the whole thing, trading for him, overpaying for him in the trade, using him the way you used him last year, which was just completely inexcusable. And I look at this front office that they've done and what they've done over the last several months, where we had a great draft. Free agency, I mean, I'm not going to say we had a great free agency period, but in these circumstances, I think it's fine. A Metcalf contract, which is great. They're doing all these things that I like. They're starting to restore some confidence in me. But then I look back at that Jamal Adams fiasco, and I'm like, how did nobody get fired for this? This is really bad. Mm-hmm. How did we give up 2 first rounders plus $70 million and nobody got fired? It still kind of sits. That's one of the things that really lingers in my mind of like, man, what happened to like accountability? What happened to holding people accountable?
Well, I think that there's 2 things with that, though. I think that that's where you and I, when we look at this offseason and see them changing so much of their approach, especially as it concerns the draft, that would seem to be indicative. Firing of Norton, which I think that, Carroll was willing to do, but that almost felt a little bit like he was being kind of, you're going to fire this guy. That's not it. He ain't getting this done. it feels like some of the control and power was wrestled away from Carroll as opposed to just being outright fired. And that's why we've seen some of the things going in a different direction. Now, I can't help but come back to Brendan. That Jamal trade to me had all the earmarks of Pete Carroll on it. He's a former safety. He knew his defense was not going to operate without that pass rush. He probably had a love affair with Jamal Adams that went back, going back to watching the LSU tape. And, you know, when Pete gets fixed on a guy, I think he really does get a fixed on him. And it doesn't matter kind of all the moving parts and how are we going to utilize him though, Pete? Well, he's just a player. We'll just put him out there and let him roll and let him go. But indeed, that doesn't work. And I think that's why, to answer your question, there wasn't a firing. Is it was like as close to you come to firing, but not firing. And let's not forget on the other side of that again, if you're firing Carroll, then you're probably firing Schneider. If you're firing both of those guys, you're writing a $60 million check this offseason. You're writing a $60 million check at the same point in time that this trust is supposed to be liquidating things. I don't know if that would, it may in itself be an easy enough decision to keep them on the deal because they don't want to go over that pass and make that choice and have to lay that kind of money down that situation, as opposed to finding this sort of, okay, you fire your coordinator, we take some of your power away. I don't have to cut a $60 million check, but we're doing some changes. We're doing something.
Okay. I mean, I can get behind that. It just, I don't know. As much as I'm pretty happy with what we've done this offseason overall, there's some things I'm not crazy about, like the Will Dissly contract, but as much as I am happy with the direction this team has taken the last few months, it's just like, how you don't even fire a GM for that. You don't, and actually, as you say it though, I agree. There's no way John Schneider wanted to trade 2 first-round picks for a safety. There's just no way.
He's
the guy who never trades up.
And a third. I mean, that 3rd round pick was going to probably hurt him as much as the 2 firsts. Knowing him with the way he values picks, I don't think John would have done this type of move. I think John's willing to trade for star players and go after guys like he has in the past and give up very big assets for it. But the assets he gave up for Graham and Percy were first and a third for Percy and first for Jimmy. I think in another throw-in pick to do the 2 firsts and the 3rd on top of it was that screamed of somebody saying, get it done by any means necessary. And telling that to an underling, and the underling being Schneider in that case going. And this also, Brendan, then adds into when the power gets wrestled from Carroll this offseason, right? If we're being detectives here. And why would it how does Schneider come out clean in this scenario? He comes back to Jody and says, Jody, I said for him not to do it. I said, don't trade for Jamal. That's a bad trade. And he told me to do it. He's vice president and he had power over me. So I did it. But it didn't mean that I wanted to do it. And then Jody goes, well, maybe I'll give you some more power. He says, well, maybe you should. Deal done, right?
Yeah. It's still speculation whether or not the Pete Carroll actually lost power this offseason. But looking at it, it does feel like something changed.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's enough. I don't know. But that's the Jamal stuff. It's just hopefully in a couple days we learned that it was just all a false alarm and he just had a little, I don't know, maybe he had a splinter, right? They just take it out.
Or they have him rehab the hand or something, right? He does the hand walk drills up a wall for 2 weeks and strengthens some small muscles in there that have, rescinded or whatever. I got a question for you on this. We've had 3 major trades for big time players in the 10-year period here with John Schneider and Coach Carroll. Bersey Harvin, Jimmy Graham, Jamal Adams. All 3 of these deals, and I don't want to speak for you, I'm going to say what I think and see what you think on it. I think are failures, not utter and total catastrophe failures, but at the end of the day, they were failure deals versus other moves you should have made or could have made in a variety of different fashions, not just one fixed approach of you use the pick for this and you keep Max Unger here and then you could have gone a variety of different other paths and you went this path instead. And it was kind of the worst result off of going other places with it. Should there be kind of more of a lesson we learn as we view this from an analytical standpoint and how we look at this team to say, when we have these presumptive deals on the table in the future of going to make a big swing for a big player, especially as we move out of the rebuild phase into that injection phase of, okay, now it's throttle down time. Maybe that we're kind of, and I'm not certain on this myself. I want to see where you stand. We're kind of out maybe a little bit on the aspect of making that kind of big swing move in that fashion again, because it has burned us. And it seems a lot harder to make it work than it does than how you write it on paper.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like the teams that give up the superstar are the ones winning the trades in the NFL lately. It's not like baseball or basketball.
Right.
Where you see teams give up superstars and end up really wishing they didn't. I think in the NBA history, actually, there are very few times a team acquired a superstar via trade and ended up regretting it.
Right.
So given the fact that an NFL team is made up of 53 players versus a basketball team made up of 15 at most, it makes sense, right? You need a well-rounded roster more than you need one or two superstars.
Yeah.
Unless maybe it's a quarterback. If it's a quarterback, they have so much power. I do. But if you find yourself in that situation where you honestly feel like you're one player away from another Super Bowl, it's going to be hard for me to say, don't do it. Let's just take our second round exit and try to hit the draft next year.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the right way to look at it either. I think we talk about, the process is more important than the results.
Yes.
So if the process is sound, then I don't want to abandon it just because. So I would look at what other teams are doing. What are some other NFL teams? Have they been trading for superstars and making it work and winning championships with them?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to abandon something just because it didn't work for us a few times. And honestly, I've been over this before. I really don't think the Jimmy Graham trade was particularly bad, especially at the time when I think Max Unger had some sort of chronic knee thing that they knew was going to end his career sooner rather than later.
Right.
And the first round pick you gave up for Jimmy Graham ended up going to some guy who, what was it? Stephone Anthony?
Yeah,
Something
it wasn't a big hit on that. And again, it's less than what the Saints pull with that deal. It's more of what, you choose to do with that deal. And you also got to consider where the center position went to when Unger left, where though, he was injury prone. He still played a couple of very good upper level years for the Saints. They loved his play there. I've heard from Saints fans who really liked what he gave them.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have at least had that on the roster, which maybe it would have given only 9-10 games a season, or maybe he was going to continue, but it's better than what you had. And you don't know what you would have done with that first round pick at that time and what the assets you could have gotten back as the return from it. I think that with the Jimmy Graham trade, it's a lot like the Jamal Adams trade, which is different from the Percy Harvin. The Percy Harvin one was there's locker room troubles. The kid's a bit of a head case. He's a bit of a problem child. You know that coming in. You seem to feel that you have some solution to get around that. And that solution was so short-lived that within a year and a half, you're offloading and dumping him to the New York Jets for basically a paltry amount of the draft picks that you got. With Graham and Jamal, it was a matter of, look, the players are fine. You just didn't have brought them in with a plan on how to use them. You tried to turn Jimmy Graham into an inline tight end. And that was a fantastical, stupid decision. Right. I mean, just absolutely asinine. So it's more of, that's why that's a failure. So it's, again, I'm not saying completely out. And like I said, I haven't come to a determination on it, whether I'd say no, but I would lean to say, if I look at a guy, rather than just saying in the past, when we made that trade for Percy Harvin, be aggressive, go aggressive, every good, all good. I might be a little bit more of, let's analyze this through a little bit more. What's the baggage we're picking up with this guy? Are we going to be able to utilize him and really implement him into this system truly? Or is this some pie in the sky again? It looks good on paper, but then when you bring him here, you're going to put him as like a duck out of water, basically, and that's not. And that's where I think this team's got to take a little bit more of a harsher look through these trades in the future if they're going to make them.
Right. It just strikes me as more of a coaching issue than a front office issue. Like the trade might be good. The Jamal Adams trade wasn't really good because it was so much. But I look at like the Jimmy Graham thing and I think the trade is fine. It's just the coaches didn't understand that trading for Jimmy Graham means trading for Jimmy Graham. It doesn't mean trade for Jimmy Graham and, now suddenly he's I don't know, Mark Bavaro or something.
Right. I mean, I get what you're saying on that, but I also go, the front office's job is to understand that the coaches are going to implement this. And you've had a conversation with the coaches to make sure they're going to implement this. And if you have some questions about that, if you know Coach Carroll, and Coach Carroll's a guy who's a creature of old habits and he doesn't like to change them. And if he gets a tight end in here, he's not going to want to flex that guy out wide as a slot. He didn't do it at USC. He didn't do it back at the NFL the last couple of times he was here. He likes to have an effect on the offense. He likes to have a say on the offense. Maybe I can anticipate that as Schneider a little bit. And that's where I'm saying a little bit it does come back to me on general manager, where it's like, you got to know your coach too. And if your coach is incapable of taking a creative piece like Graham or like Jamal Adams and implementing them properly, and by Jamal Adams' point, Brendan, it almost makes the Jamal Adams trade even worse, right? Because he had the Graham trade as a baseline. He knew this guy might take a guy in here and completely take a round hole and peg it, jam it into the square and keep pounding it into that square hole because he keeps thinking it'll eventually fit. And so you had the reason to believe that this is maybe a place to avoid now, especially, but that's, again, Brendan, here's how we get back to Carroll made the call on that Adams deal. right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you logically just go, well, wait, John would have said da da da. It just, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff about that era of Seahawks football that just will never make sense, and nothing they ever say is going to explain it. And again, I'll say it, as much as I have liked most of this offseason from the Seahawks, it doesn't totally sit well with me that nobody got fired for these inexcusable mistakes. Even you could have brought in a 12-year-old kid who plays Madden all day, and he wouldn't have tried to make Jimmy Graham a blocking tight end. He wouldn't have tried to make Jamal Adams a deep safety. He wouldn't have tried to make Kyle Fuller play guard. And you're just
Agreed.
like, what are we doing?
Yeah, agreed. That's that hubris, and that's why you get Carroll talking about in that press conference at the combine that we've been a little bit arrogant. I mean, to get Carroll to say that out of his own mouth, from the straight from the mouth, to say that, it's in reference to that. You've been arrogant. You thought you can jam guys into your scheme because your scheme's so magnificent that it overcomes and it's the end all be all. Whether it's the players that make the modern NFL, it's the talent that makes the modern NFL. And you can still be smarter X and O's, and you can still out people, out scheme them a bit, but you need the players at their best. You need to put them in the players' positions, put them in positions where they're doing what they do best, not what they do at their worst. And you're right. A 12-year-old could have figured this out. I'm with you. It drives me absolutely insane that this is something that you walk away from going. But the thing that I take some onus on, at least, Brendan, is that you're seeing indicators they've learned their lesson of this. We've not seen any big trades. The guys are stopped. They're somewhat not using guys out of position as much. They're starting to put guys in the right positions on things, So I'm taking encouragement from that, but it does remain to be seen if they can fully fix these kind of things like that are longstanding issues and how they use guys.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to some smaller items. That's the Metcalf stuff, the Adams stuff. It's all very compelling and interesting. But there's some other stuff going on here as well. We had two fairly high-profile retirements this week. One of a player who I think we had all already kind of mentally moved on from, and another player who we had literally moved on from a year ago. So that's not exactly anything that affects this team. But Chris Carson retired, I believe, on Monday. Maybe it was Tuesday. Carroll came out yesterday and said it was clear a month ago that it was not going to happen, but they wanted to let him continue to work towards it just to see if some miracle would occur. But yeah, Carson is now retired, and apparently he won't make an announcement because he wants to see if he can make a comeback if something amazing happens with his neck. But you talked about the thing in his neck a month ago, last we met. It's not happening.
So we thought it was originally just spinal fusion, which is the discs in the back of the neck. Well, either naturally or doctors can do this. They'll fuse them together so that you can remove pain and you can just get it as basically one. It turns into one disc back there. And so I had thought that that's what DK Metcalf had initially at the start of the offseason. But then we had that recent story that came up that actually showed he's getting this hardware in his neck. My brother, of course, works for a company that does that. It's a medical company that does those very same surgeries and with not chiropractors, but with doctors, surgeons, back surgeons. And so he was very well aware of it. The second he saw it, he called me and he said, he's done. It was not like, well, I think he's like, we do this stuff. If he gets hit in his neck the wrong way, he could be paralyzed for life. And so the Seahawks were doing him a solid, Brendan. It was a little bit of like, what's the word? It's not condescending, but you're playing along because you're doing like, okay, yeah, we'll just keep tracking it. We'll give you another test. I think they knew throughout this, as evidenced by the Walker pick, that he wasn't coming back, right? If you thought there was a 50% chance he's coming back, does the Walker pick happen? Maybe not. Yeah.
I kind of feel like it would. Because even if Carson comes back, it's a 1-year proposition probably, right? Not only is he going to be lucky to make it through another year of wear and tear, but his contract was only 3 years, and the last year, very little money. You can just cut him. I'm sure we would have done that unless he had a monster year, which he would not have had.
But if you thought you're getting him back, that's a cheap final year of the deal, though. If he's still playing well.
I can't imagine even if we thought Carson was coming back, it couldn't have been a long-term thing. And Penny's on a 1-year deal. So both those guys could have been gone after this year regardless. So if you wanted Ken Walker, I think you still get Ken Walker.
I think you're probably right. I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit on it. But yeah, I think you're probably right on that in that regard.
Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of relieved it's over. I'm kind of relieved he's not going to try to drag himself out there and make something really bad happen.
I'm with you on it. I don't want to see a guy risk as being paralyzed. I've seen some players on the football field, including Mike Utley when I was young, that had quite an effect watching that happen and how that was reported on. You just realized how real violent the sport truly is. There was a guy in the 70s that had it happen to, it just on a brutal hit as well. And so you don't want to see it. Let's avoid it. And it's nice that he's got his money. Part of why I think you're also right that they would drop Walker's. I think even when they signed him the contract, they knew this was a likelihood of what could happen. They knew he had a chronic neck injury. They'd already been down the road with neck injuries on guys like Lockett and Averill and Chancellor, and yet they still took the risk on the contract for whatever risk that was, even though it was a large amount of money. But good player. I do think, Brendan, like I'm talking about a little bit about making those big swings for big players down the road. Another one of the questions I've been kind of wondering to ask you on. You've got 15 years of football here in Seattle, okay? You signed Sean Alexander a monstrous deal after an MVP season, and it was putrid. Horrible contract. You got Julius Jones in here. Not a big contract. Signed him from the Cowboys. Not a good contract. Didn't get the value out of it. You signed Marshawn Lynch to 1 contract extension. Great. Fantastic signing. 2 contract extension. Great. Fantastic signing. 3rd one, not good. Had to eat a lot of dead money hit and eventually had to really pay the price on that 3rd extension you gave him. Eddie Lacy for $4 million. Carlos Hyde for $4 million. Chris Carson on this 3-year deal. Are we learning a lesson here? Maybe that the running backs are something that you shouldn't be spending money on.
I would hope so. And look, I mean, I'm not saying that guys like Travis Homer and DJ Dallas are anything special, but the fact that you're able to pull competent running backs from that late in the draft every year should give you some indication that it's not that big of a deal to replace these guys. So I would hope. I would hope. Look, if Ken Walker ends up being a Nick Chubb level running back, then I'll understand giving him that 2nd contract. But if he's just like good or really good, anything short of like elite, I would hope that we realize that we don't have to marry ourselves to this.
Okay, so let's play this out in a scenario then, Brendan. You have first year, Penny's the bell cow. He goes out, gets 1,400 yards this year, moves on in free agency. Walker's the bell cow then for the next 2 years. He racks up 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns a year on average. Really good. 4.5, 4.6 yard per carry average, right on the edge of being elite. Now you've got to come down at that time with inflation and sign him to a 4-year, it'll be an extension on the final year of that deal, of course, or whatever. And so then you're looking at at that time, probably like a 4-year, $70 million deal, $75 to $80 million deal. Do you make that signing at that time or go to look to get another just uber talented running back at that point?
Absolutely not. I'm not even thinking about it. I wouldn't even consider it. 1,200 yards a year is not even that impressive in a 17-game season. Like if you're talking about maybe like 2,000 yards, then you're getting to the area where I'm thinking, okay, maybe, and
Okay.
emphasis on maybe. But 1,200 yards is not moving the needle for me. I with a 17-game season, I think you could. I think DJ Dallas might be able to get 1,200 yards if he played 17 games. Honestly, so no.
So I wanted to see where your needle was on that. That's where I wanted to see, because if he's out there and he's giving you Kamara production that got Kamara his contract extension, I'm a no. It's good production. I'm just a no on it at that point. And it's only at 10 or 11 million a year for like Kamara, McCaffrey, which is big money for a back right now. But 3 years down the line, we're talking 16, 17 million a year for a back at that risk and that price. And that's where I'm with you. He's got to have some kind of insane level of production at that point to justify that from where I stand, because again and again, this comes back over and over again where you pay running backs and you don't get your returns. And not just with us and not just with our history. I just mentioned our 15-year history, but look at the NFL over the last 6 years alone and the running backs who have gotten paid and what happens to them after they got paid and the production that they provide you on the football field. And most of those teams at probably what, Brendan, would you say an 80% clip end up regretting those deals? Is that fair in general terms?
Yeah, and also there's also the question of usage. There's a certain amount of touches that a running back gets to, where after they get to that number, they're not going to be as good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's actually maybe starting to happen with Derrick Henry now. He missed a good chunk of last year, and by the time he came back for the playoffs, he gave you nothing in that playoff game. Basically, Christian McCaffrey broke down even earlier than getting to that touch number. I think Kamara has gotten to it now, and he's going to start to fall off. granted, he does some things with catching the ball that are going to help, but I think even with the greatest running backs, even with the best running backs in the league, they get
Ezekiel
to
Elliott.
1,300 touches and it's over.
Yeah. I just think you got to lean into that, which is part of why I say, this is why we end up in saying where I'll say, okay, I don't want a first round running back, but why I think back to that second round argument of whether running backs are valid to take there, go get the value there. That's where you're paying the price. Cause I'm not paying the price in how I'm going to pay him in contract. I'll pay him the price on that second round pick, which is really what would have been a first round pick 20 years ago that slid into the second round. Great value. I'm getting him on a cheap contract because it's a second round contract. Get the most out of those years and then rinse, repeat again down the line.
So yeah, I'm hoping we learn our lesson here at the end of the day. The running back thing. I mean, I've always kind of thought running backs outside of maybe 2, 3, or 4 guys were pretty replaceable. Most guys are replaceable, and even the ones that aren't replaceable, they're not going to play for 15 years and be great. Mm-hmm. The days of Curtis Martin rushing for 1,000 yards, 11 straight years, that doesn't really happen anymore.
No. It feels like guys are sitting out more and more too. It feels like maybe it's less Toradol use or something, but it does feel like as well, you're getting these guys on just the dings and pings of a season are not going to look at Kamara. It's like every year he's good for 4 or 5 games. It seems like that he's out. And I think that's the other thing with it is just like, you're just not getting what you had before, what you got before. And you think you are, even with their age sometimes. I mean, Dallas thought with Ezekiel Elliott, who came into this league really young, that, even though we're signing him early, he's still only in his early 20s here. I mean, the guy's going to be out in free agency at like 28, but he's done for all intents and purposes. Nobody's giving him a new contract. There's some people in Dallas who think Pollard's better going behind him. And I think you got to look at it through that real critical eye a little bit. If Father Time's undefeated, he is really especially hard on those running backs as far as their lifeline and how long they're allowed to go. And your touches thing is right. It's like a car. There's only so many miles on it you got with them. And once you hit the mileage point, it doesn't matter. It's done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the other retirement, this one doesn't really have anything to do with the current team, but it is kind of nice. KJ Wright signed a 1-day contract yesterday, and I believe he retired today. Did you have any interest at all in bringing him back to play this year?
I actually did, not for nostalgia's sake, but because I don't think very highly of Cody Barton, number one. Number two, I was worried about the depth of the middle linebacker position, and KJ indeed has played middle linebacker. He's had a handful of games he started at middle linebacker in his career as a Seahawk. So I think he could play it. You look at Ben Burke-Irvin gets released with his injury, and gets even thinner there at the middle linebacker position. And I go, what's the downside at that point, outside of him saying he wants to be paid at, like he had that Busting with the Boys episode where he talked about if Seattle offered him the vet minimum, he'd be like, he'd go play vet minimum somewhere else, right? Like he wouldn't take that. So I don't know if he was willing to maybe take that low end of a deal to do it. I would like to think he probably was, because he just wanted to keep playing, you'd think, by his reaction. But I'm a little surprised to see Seattle pass on that point and not look at that as an opportunity to upgrade that inside linebacker core, because that's right now for me, Brendan, the scariest position on this team as far as depth in a place where it could go wrong really fast for us.
I mean, I get it, but wouldn't you rather take a look at one of these young guys, even pick up a guy off the street almost, rather than bring in KJ for one more year when you already saw that he really didn't have a lot left in Las Vegas last year?
Well, I guess it depends on the guy we're talking about who's available on the street. I would want to see what name we're talking about. If it had been maybe Quan Alexander that they were looking at, who was just signed, if that's who you're talking about, a guy like that, then yeah, you got me on board from it. They didn't seem too interested in him. There aren't a lot of other guys outside of Quan Alexander that are available in the middle. Maybe you could say the guy out of Minnesota, who's I think still available out there. Maybe him, but it's a lean crew out there. There's not a lot of options. And when you talk about this team, John Radigan, Donker, Tanner Muse, I don't know what these guys are. Maybe they're a little more fleet of foot, but can they process? Is their brain in the same place KJ is? I do think KJ's, not fleet of foot. And look, Cody might beat him out at that starter role, but I think at least KJ pushes him. And right now, I'm not so sure that Cody's being pushed by anybody on this roster currently. And that's a scary proposition for a guy that has at times struggled on that football field when you've asked him to go out there and play.
Okay. I wasn't too interested in it, honestly. If it comes to it, if it really does come to it, part of me would be like, well, before we put KJ out there, let's put a Vi Jones out there, or Lakiem Williams, or a Donkor. I wouldn't say Tanner Muse. I think he's too small to play on the inside in a 3-4. He's like 225. But I don't know. I'm just not trying to bring back KJ so we can have that last year where he's completely washed up and it's not fun to watch him. But I do agree with you. Cody Barton's probably not going to be the guy. So having a backup solution would have been nice. And we've lost 2 of them because Radigan's going to be out a while and BBK is probably going to miss the season.
Right. That's, I mean, and look, I'm okay with going to making a trade right now. If they want to go flip a 5th round pick for a legitimate inside linebacker in a 3-4 defense, who's maybe got some coverage ability where Jordan doesn't have that and he can match up and he's going to be better than Cody, I'm all on board on making that deal. I just don't think there's a guy that on the streets is better than KJ. And I don't think what's on this roster right now, as it stands, is better than KJ necessarily. It might be, but I haven't seen it proved by what I've seen, and certainly not out of Cody Barton's play, which people want to tell you last year he played all this great at the end of the year. He played all right. He ate up tackles, like you harp on a lot. Just because you eat up tackles does not make it a good player or a well-played game. It's the totality of everything you're doing on top of those tackles. And in totality with him last year, still at the end of the year with all those tackles, a little bit below average. Still at the end of the year, even with the PFF bump for what he does on special teams, still below average as an overall grade. So it's a concern for me in a big time way. And that's more of that. It's more the concern and more or less of how much I think of KJ at this point, where he's at. You're right. I do think he is highly diminished at this point.
Yeah. They basically didn't have him play any passing downs. And there was one game where the Raiders had injuries and they had to put him out there on passing downs. And it was bad. I remember actually a lot of people on Twitter specifically calling out how, I think it was against the Chargers, Herbert was just going at whoever was on KJ on pretty much every single play. So I don't know. Part of me is like, let's just see what we have. Even if what we have is terrible, maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised. I don't know, but it was kind of cool that he feels good enough about this team to where he can come back and sign that one day deal where there's not the bad blood that you seem to be seeing with guys like Sherman and Earl who aren't doing that.
I agree. I love that. It was a highly emotional moment you saw there. Of course, I'm sure you saw the same picture where Carroll comes over and hugs him as he signed the contract. It's nice to see because like you're touching on, there has been a lot of sort of animosity in a variety of different ways from this organization with some of these players that have come through and provided such good play for us and been such good soldiers for us. And you really don't want to see that. You want to see love. You want to see love forever and them to look back and revere their coach and talk about him in nothing but platitudes and his brilliance and all that. And hopefully that is the case with KJ. I do like too, Brendan, with KJ, with Cam, with Cliff. You got to just have if you got a you're going to be a coach because you're going to be a coach, but not a true coach, an advisory coach, which is the positions that they put with these guys. Everybody talks about, I'm sure you hear it in your chat. We got to get Cam for a coach, or we got to get Cliff down there as these guys are serving a very important role now outside of being a coach. They're training these guys up. They're there as a resource for them. KJ is going to be there, as he's already said in his press conference, a resource for these linebackers. And having those kind of recent players that have just got out of the game that are there as a resource for these new up and coming players has got to be pretty valuable. You give KJ $100,000 a year for a consultant role and call it a day, and let him come in and do what he's going to do to help out. And I think he could be of help in that respect.
Yeah. And whenever people start talking about that, I always say, like, are you sure they want to do that? Coaching's not easy. The hours suck. You don't get much out of it. It's got to be really hard work to get all these, a lot of them, especially the young guys, immature people, like they're, not even really adults yet, to get on the same page. Like, people keep talking about that stuff with Cam. I'm like, are we sure Cam even wants that? That's a lot of work for not a whole lot you get out of it.
100%. And if you've got most things, it's either you're doing that or you're doing nothing. We have found an in-between point where we're still getting using them as a valuable resource and allowing them to be helpful. Cam's worked with Marquise Blair. Cliff Avrill's worked with our pass rushers, is continually working with our pass rushers right now on the often. And now we hear from KJ that he's going to be there as a resource as well. And you've already got the coaches, and it can't do nothing but add another extra layer of help for players trying to find their way as they're developing. It's a great thing to have in our back pocket as an organization.
Right. That's why it always surprised me like crazy that Deion Sanders actually went to coaching. I thought he would never have any interest in something like that.
Jackson State too, where he's going to try to take a program from literally nothing to rise it up into prominence. And I mean, everything I've heard about him is he's the real deal with it and how serious he's taking it. It's not merely he's going to Jackson State and he's going to buy a bunch of prospects to bring in. It's that he's trying to go down there and truly bring them. But I'm with you. I was equally as shocked that Dion decided to do that. I never would have saw that coming from him as a player. This guy didn't want to tackle. Great. I mean, one of the best all-time, maybe the best all-time man-for-man corner there ever is in a game, cover corner there ever has been. Maybe the best ball skills from the cornerback position you've ever seen. But my guy never wanted to cover. I mean, what part of is he going to be teaching tackling technique was what I first thought. Like, how's that going to go?
Yeah. All right. So that's Chris. That's KJ. It's in both cases, I'm pretty happy with the way it ended up playing out. It's sad that we're here now with Carson, but given the fact that we are now here with Carson, I'm happy that it ended like this and not with him getting hurt in week 2 and getting carted off.
Well, could you imagine Carson goes into week 2, like you said, carted off, not only carted off, but we then come to learn that he doesn't have use of his legs anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's that those things don't go well where it's like, oh, and he doesn't have the use of his legs and he needs a nurse all the time. It's not just that. Those guys also don't have a very long lifespan either. You will pass at a much younger age too. It's not a good life to live. And then it's early life, not worth the risk. You got your millions, young guy, go out there and enjoy yourself for what you've done. You laid it on the line. Like I said, he's got no one to apologize to. So I agree with you. It is encouraging, puts a smile on your face. And the team did solid by him, by the way. I think they knew about that neck injury prior to signing that contract. And this was a solid by a player type deal, I think, because I don't think there was much of a market out there available for him, Brendan.
Yeah. I've always kind of suspected that a little bit myself. And I think this retirement might save us a couple million, but it's not enough money for it to even really matter at this point. So
no, and I'm unsure of that too. I got to wait for the details of that because I've heard there's also something with injury designations on that. You might have brought that up to me originally, but there's something with the injury designation on guarantees with that where I'm not sure if that stuff kicks into where it then just fully guarantees everything on it, which might be what they did. Which it's not a huge contract, but we're still going to feel it even in the next season at this point.
Right. Okay. So let's get into training camp a little bit here. I guess that's probably the last thing we can get into. We went into all the individual player stuff. So training camp, we're now 2 days in. Other than the bad Jamal news, there was a little bit of injury stuff. Dwayne Eskridge. So there's another guy. Who it's like a Jamal thing where when things go wrong for them, it's magnified because of the expectations and their inability to live up to it so far. Yeah. So this is getting annoying, right?
It's annoying to me, Brendan, because I don't like when I call stuff on draft night and I keep coming back looking good for it. Like I should be made to look an idiot on my draft night takes at times, right? Like I shouldn't be able to say LJ Collier's a bust. And then 3 years later, we're like, yeah, he was a bust. We learned that was it. I shouldn't be able to say I have trepidations about this Dwayne Eskridge pick, partly because of the fact that he's got injury issues. And people got so sensitive to me when I even said that on the draft night thing. You'll get over. He's got time. You get pro program, weight training program. Ivan the Terrible. He'll be great. And it was a worry for me on draft night. Part of the reason I didn't like the pick as much at that time. Part of why I was down on the pick. And now we do continue to see it. He had a foot injury walking in the door last year, much like this hamstring. Just walk on into training camp with an injury. I don't know. What have you been doing to yourself this offseason? So comes right into it. Then we get the concussion. Like, let's not forget he changed his jersey number in college to try to change his injury luck. You can literally go find the story with the quote of him saying those exact words. So I'm not surprised to see it, Brendan. I'm hopeful that he can get around it. I'm not trying to sell on this kid, but it's an honest to God worry with him going forward. And that there's much, you couldn't see the Jamal situation coming. He really wasn't all that broken prior to coming him. He was out on the field. He was consistent. He was there. This injury situation has been a new thing with him here. This thing with this kid, you could see coming. Part of why I hammered that pick at that time. If I can see, if he's been injured in college and that's been a huge problem, it's not likely he's just going to suddenly get over that hump in the pros. It can happen from time to time, like a Frank Gore type, but it's not the norm.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hate the pick when we made it. I didn't like it, but I didn't completely hate it the way that I hated actually the Jordan Brooks pick and didn't like the Collier pick very much either. But this is definitely another situation where everything he does or doesn't do is going to be magnified. I said last year that there was a lot on Eskridge because you could say that drafting Eskridge is the reason why we didn't go after Julio Jones when he was put up for trade last year. And a lot of people are going to look at that and go, we could have had Julio Jones be our number 3 receiver, but we decided to stay away partially because you drafted Eskridge. And then Eskridge ends up not really doing anything for you. So now that we're here in year 2, it's just going to keep compounding, and it's another thing, kind of like the Jamal thing. You look at all these terrible draft picks, Collier. I'm not going to necessarily say Penny, because I understand he was turning the corner and then he tore every ligament in his body or whatever. That's kind of a fluke.
Yeah.
But obviously Collier's the big one. Now this Eskridge thing, it's like, man, how did nobody get held accountable for this stuff?
I'm with you. I mean, and it's part of why I think the drafting went so well this offseason, just more kind of proof in the pudding of something, whether it's Carroll having powers relinquished or just a change in the dynamic of the draft room or the process there. I think something was implemented anew for such great change to be undertaken in just one simple or last 2 simple drafts. But yeah, it's also, you mentioned about the Julio. It's like you bring in Julio and then you also get the Creed. That's the other aspect of that. Draft a Creed Humphrey to this offense last year with that at the center position. Does that change any of our outlook last year? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't just go, well, because Julio was beat up with Tennessee, he would have been beaten up here. Maybe, maybe not. He would have been in a different situation here, different training program here, different way we would have probably tried to use him. So I don't know the answer to that, and nobody else out there either does. But it would have been an approach that I was more in favor of at the time. In retrospect, I'd much rather be sitting with Creed right now and on that. And if you came out with the end of results and now we're sitting on Cross, Creed in the middle, and Lucas on the right, it's a pretty good line you're building to the future right there as a beginning place, right? It's not the worst of beginning spots. So, you know, I'm with you, by the way, on that. I abhorred and hated the LJ Collier pick. I didn't like the Jordan Brooks pick, not as much because he wasn't a good player, but because it meant you were going to push Bobby out probably a little early. He was going to be playing out of position for 2 years at the will linebacker, which was going to magnify his issues in coverage, which meant you were going to get below league average play out of the will for the first 2 years of this guy's contract. And then by the year that he balled out, year 3, then you're going to have to pay him. So you didn't get any of the benefits of him with that. So that's why as much as anything with where he stood as a player, I hated that. But the Eskridge I didn't hate. It was confounding to me a little bit for where you could have gone in another direction. And I still think he can be a useful player, but injury things like Jamal.
Yeah. You know, at least the Rams ended up with Tutu Atwell, right?
Poo-poo. I call him. Yeah. It's Poo-poo Atwell. Because he weighs not exactly what a bowel movement weighs. And he had the same thing. I hated him for the same reason. I go, this guy weighs literally 148 pounds on his pro day, Atwell. I go, that guy's going to get broken up and broken down. You can't play the NFL at 148 pounds, period. And then what happens in his first year, Brendan? Broken down a little bit, can't find his way on the football field for the Rams. They had that Stecken, Wright, and Hodennecker guy that they kept running out instead of Atwell at times.
Yeah, I remember that. I was wondering where he went. I was watching the Rams playoff games. I was like, didn't they draft this guy? And I couldn't remember his name. Yeah. I needed to have my stream chat remind me who it was. I remember that.
250-pound linebacker hits a 150-pound man. 150-pound man goes boom, goes splat. That's just physics at play. And I don't know if he's going to have a way again. We'll see if they find a way this year to use him, but he was nothing last year for them.
Garth Knight, thank you for the $5. Jamal is the bestest. Dwayne, I assume, has a car named Christine that is stalking and attacking him. I guess that's a Dwayne Brown thing.
Because of the guns.
Yeah.
Because he needs guns on his person at all times. But Christine could take some bullets, right? Couldn't the old Christine? She could take some shots and keep going when it's possessed by a spirit, you know?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, the Dwayne Brown thing, because he played pretty well last year. He should be able to get a contract somewhere, but probably not now. It made it a lot harder.
Closes the door, right? Like if the door's a little bit cracked open, if they have a first injury out, he'll probably still get a call because there'll be some team that's a contender that has a left tackle go down to an ACL at some point, and they'll make the call to him and he'll get his chance there. But certainly to get another good contract, at least a good 1 year, $8-9 million, you ain't getting that now. You know, it's going to be $1 and a couple $3 million is the top end of what you can expect to get.
Yeah, it's really kind of curious, isn't it, that he and Dunlap, Dunlap got signed today, but it took forever for those guys to actually get any attention at all, and Dwayne Brown's still waiting.
Well, and you have right now, last year you had three left tackles over the age of 35 playing in the NFL, and Whitworth, God bless him, was a freak. Could somehow stay on the field and still be dominant, even to being 40 years old before he retired. But the other two guys, Jason Peters and Dwayne Brown, were a little beaten up and fought through it a little bit on the injury front to a degree. I think teams just don't trust the health of a guy that's moving more towards his late 30s and being able to, kind of maintain it. And to your point, Dwayne had a good year last year at the end of the day. When all shook out, he was a little bit better than average. So, he didn't play bad per se.
I think he was well above average, actually.
I think 71 was like his PFF.
Yeah, and I don't know how PFF accounts for the sacks that he had no business giving up. That the
what
ones
are you saying, Brennan? What are you saying?
The ones where he turns around and starts screaming at Wilson because you made me look bad and I'm trying to get this money.
That was one of my favorite parts of Dwayne Brown is how boisterous he would be, and instantly being on the field and calling Russ on his crap when Russ took one of those BS sacks. Because no lineman here has ever been that way with Russ.
Yeah.
They've gone back in, but he would be the one guy you'd watch him stomping and and they're like, yes, Dwayne, give it to him. Get that ball.
I don't know. Maybe you should be doing that behind closed doors, but he's an old man now, and he's like, whatever. You're gonna kick me out of the league for this? Fine, I've already made my money.
Well, I agreed. And what if, with him, he knew time was of the essence. I got to win now. It's my shot. And maybe he had seen with Russ some of those mistakes continually being made. And some of them were I remember one that he had that was just this horrible sack, Brendan, where it's a 3-step drop. You've got to get the ball out of your hand. The line is blocking for the 3-step drop. Both tackles are on a short set that they're dropping into. And Russell decides to turn it into a 7-step drop in the moment. And it's like, Dwayne looks right back at him and you could see it. The play was set up and designed. The play was there and open for the first read for Russell to hit into. And he just had one of those Russell moments where some idea went into his head and midway through the play. And he's like, I'm going to try to do something big.
Yeah. That was the Bears game. That was the big one from Dwayne Brown. I remember where he was just like, he's like, you know what? I don't care if I look like a bad teammate right now. That's not okay. I'm throwing a fit. That was the one. There was a lot of bad sacks at times, Russell, of the last year and a half that have been taken at times. That might have been one of the worst because that's like ABC football. 3-step drop, ball out. The line. Your tackles are going to block in a certain way to push those guys wide at that point, right? You push them wide to create the wider lane on the shorter pass then, right? Because if that edge moves off, your tackle moves you got a huge lane to throw to. So the tackle was going to lean into that guy going wide, like a wide 9 run and going at the quarterback. But if the quarterback goes back to a 7-step drop, it's an easy sack. It's going to be literally he walks himself into a sack, which is what happened. So that was one of the shining examples of WTF, Russ. WTF, man. What is your process there? Yeah. I seem to remember that Dwayne Brown started slow, like he was genuinely not playing that well at the start, and then it got better over time. So he can help a team win for sure. It's just maybe he's going to have a harder time selling himself now. So these first couple days of training camp, other than that, the injury front is clean for the most part. Trey Brown is on the PUP, but it sounds like he's going to be back soon. Tyreek Smith on the PUP, but it also sounds like he's about to come back. Yeah. The Quandre Diggs was out there, which was good to see because last time we saw him, it was not good. You had Marquise Blair was not on the PUP, which is a big one because this is a big year for him. This is a make or break year. Well, especially with Jamal, right? Too. He's the first guy off the bench with Jamal now. So yeah. Go Marquise. Yeah. So it's a pretty clean injury situation. But is there anything from these first couple days of training camp that you've heard that stands out to you in any way? I think a big part of the potential success of this season is going to be based upon Rashad Penny and him being on the field and him getting 10 or more carries in a game, Brendan. I know you had maybe a chance to check out the video and I put on him, but that stat that comes back to me over and over again in my mind when I think about Rashad Penny is that he's had 11 games where he's had 10 carries or more. And in those games where you got him 10 carries or more, he averaged 6.8 yards per carry. And that's more than a sample size at 11 games. That's well over 1,000 yards. And it fits to more what you hear from running backs in that they tend to need more carries to get in the rhythm, to set defenses up, to get those big plays that will come when you can give them those amount of carries. And the big part of him getting those carries is, of course, Brendan, everybody putting the injury-prone label on him and that everyone's saying he's incapable of getting that point because of this injury-prone nature he's had throughout his time here as a Seahawk. He had a press conference where he gave out a nice little tidbit, Brendan, that confirmed a little bit of what I've been talking about with these injuries that have come after the ACL, and that they are all related back to that surgery. And that you can get over the hump of those small tissue injuries, but there's a timetable where you're technically healthy to get on the football field while you're still then working through those small tissue injuries to eventually get to a stage where now you're back to almost near full health of what you were prior to the injury. And sometimes that's 2.5 years down the line to get to that point. He confirmed that a little bit in his press conference, specifically speaking to those points, which I think just further opens up the door for us
on him being dominant for those games to give you those 10 carries or more. And if he gets those 10 carries or more, look out, brother. You're looking at a 1,500 yard season minimum, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm excited to see what Penny does in this new offense, because last year, even though Penny played really well, I still feel like most of the carries were just up the middle, a lot of that going on. And he still was doing well, when I think we all know that Rashad Penny is at his best when he's allowed to bounce it outside, that outside zone stuff.
Agreed.
So I'm really excited to see what he could do here, because he last year he led the league in yards per carry, I think, with that restriction on him. Now, I don't expect him to play all 17 games, but most running backs don't. Like, if over a 17-game season, if you're playing running back, probably gonna wear down a little bit. So if he plays like 13 or 14 games, that's totally fine by me. And that's why you draft Ken Walker. That's why you have guys like Travis Homer and DJ Dallas who do have some value. But I think that if we can get the Penny thing going the way it was at the end of last year, we should be winning a lot of games.
I agree. In the back and building the back on that outside run, which now that you have a center that can pull in space, which you didn't necessarily have before as much as you do now with an Austin Blythe, and two tackles on the edge that can get to the reach blocks out in space, which is one of the hallmarks of making the outside zone run and pitch play runs work properly, is getting linemen that can move even sometimes 3-4 yards into an outer edge and get there quicker than the defensive end can by a positioning point, more than by a pure moving the man off of a spot point. You need that too, but it's the first part of the equation, is getting the guy out there in space. And you have that now set up to be able to do that. That's one of the reasons, Brendan, why I think, yes, they've been obsessed with running it up the middle. That's 100%. But I've also think it's been because of Carroll's predilection to lean towards these monstrous offensive linemen that are big, but don't move all that well, because he believes mass moves mass.
So yeah, I'm excited. The one thing with the Penny part that is holding me back a little bit is it's so unlikely he's here next year. And this year's probably a little bit of a gap year. I don't want to say a throwaway year, but it's not going to be a great year for this team in all likelihood. So it's almost like, well, if he's bad, then he's bad. If he's good, he's probably going to go somewhere else and make a lot of money, which good for him. But it's hard to get super excited when you know that he's probably only going to be here 1 year and then he'll be moving on when the team is hopefully going in the right direction.
Well, let me try to get you hyped on one given point within that maybe you're not considering with this. And that is that if he goes out and balls out this year and gets you a 1,600 yard season, or better, if he's in that dominant role at times that he's shown flashes of, like the 6.8 yard per carry average I just mentioned, or the 7.3 yard per carry average he was averaging on outside runs prior to the torn ACL injury. He has only had probably 3 outside runs since then, but he's dominant outside as well with that. Okay, he goes out and has that year, Brendan. The cap goes up with the Amazon money through the roof. Some team goes out there and offers him a 4-year, $45 million deal at that point. You, with the money that you have, like we've talked about before, play more of the game of the trade game by adding on additions, more of the signing contracts from within if there's guys that deserve it outside of him in this case. Now you're playing the compensatory game. Now for that outstanding season, maybe you can, if you play this right, get a 3rd or 4th round pick back in compensatory value for an upward season that he has at that point.
Okay. I mean, if there's something like that going on there. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's exciting. We used to play that compensatory game really well, and lately we haven't. So, okay, I can get behind that. But still, there is part of me that's like, there's no scenario where Rashad Penny's part of a dominant or a very unlikely scenario where Rashad Penny's part of like a dominant backfield in 2024 for a Seahawks team that's going to the Super Bowl.
100%. This is a 1-year situation, and that's definite. I think the team, like I said, I think the team, this is one of the lessons they've learned, is that we're not going to pay big money anymore to contracts on running backs, and Carson's only going to reinforce that, I think.
Garth Knight, thank you for the $5 again. Brando, tell Brendan there was a Seahawks scout that thought Cooper Kupp shouldn't have been drafted. Bad take from a scout. I did hear about this. I've heard that before. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't look good. Every team makes mistakes in the draft, but when you combine this with the other ones, it starts to get like, oh boy. Who are our scouts?
Yeah, I saw it the other day too. I saw a little bit of his tape. I don't know why it came up on my YouTube feed, but I saw a little bit of his Eastern Washington tape, and he was moving different on that football field too. Like, just to take a guy with those kind of hands he was displaying and the way he was moving with the size, he was a bigger receiver too. Yeah, it's at a smaller school, but you move the way you move and it stands out. And even I've seen it enough in scouting some of these guys through the last couple of years with the channel. It's just, you can see guys that do just have a little bit of a different movement to their game. And you combine that with his ability to catch in college. To say that guy wasn't NFL capable or worthy, as that Seahawks scout did tell it was a local radio host who recounted the story. Not good, man. And like I said, that guy should definitely, there's a fireable offense for missing on a player. I mean, if you're going to say, I only see him as a 5th round guy, that's something. But to say, I don't even see him capable of being able to operate on an NFL football field, period.
Yeah.
Pretty far. Triple crown winner.
Yeah. I don't think very many people dispute the fact that we were a terrible drafting team for most of the last 9 years. I think that I tried to find, I remember last year I went through other teams' drafts, tried to find a team that from 2013 to at that point, the present, had drafted worse than the Seahawks in that window of time. And I found like the Giants have been really bad drafting. There isn't a whole lot else that's worse. And I don't know if the Giants are worse. I think they are, but we're right at the bottom is the point.
Yeah. And we've had as many, and throughout that time, I would say you're probably top 3, if not the number 1 team with the most picks to go through in that time period. That you accumulated the most total selections, meaning you had the most swings to go and find those guys, which makes it even all that much more worse.
Chase Stern, thank you for the $10. Do you think Geno could be a decent QB? I mean, I think he kind of is, and that's kind of the problem. He's just good enough to not win the game, but he's good enough to keep it kind of interesting. Like, he kind of is a decent QB, but decent QBs are not good enough.
So this has been something been pretty hotly debated over on my side on some live streams recently. Can Geno Smith become Ryan Tannehill, Brendan?
Ryan Tannehill, I think that's a little beyond him. Like, Ryan Tannehill, I know we're talking about him right after he stunk up the joint in the playoffs and maybe cost the Titans a Super Bowl run because things were set up well for them.
Yeah.
But I think Tannehill's a little beyond him. I'm trying to find a better comp. Like, shoot. It's not anybody that I'm excited to bet my franchise's future on.
And I mean, to me, I think he can be a decent QB. I do think he can be a middle of the road guy. I think he'd be very close to what Tannehill gives the Titans. I come back to saying again and again, I think the way people view the Seahawks quarterback situation is a little bit through how you would view most of the NFL teams' quarterback situations, being that they need to have a quarterback who's capable of being a high volume guy, who can throw it 40 times a game, who can be the centerpiece of your offense. What we're going to ask our guy to do is throw 25 to 28 times a game. And of those 28 throws, there's probably going to be 10 of those that are easily scripted, right? Bubble screens, drag routes, stuff that's just, he's going to come off of, he'll be under center, come off play action. There'll be a Disley running over wide open on the side, right? For a 6-7 yard gain. There's going to be a lot of those throws built within those 25. So you're really, to me, at the end of the day, talking about 10 to 15 high leverage to semi high leverage throws that he has to make a game. Can he get half of those? Can he get a quarter of those? Can that be enough if you do have a dominant run game and a defense playing, let's say, somewhere near top 10 or top 12? And I think, yeah, he could slide in to be a decent QB with what he's got on the outside to work with the running backs you have back here, with the tight ends on the side. I think he's got a lot of ammo to get the most out of him.
Yeah, I always kind of come back to this. The NFL right now, so much of games, so many games come down to it's close at the end and one team has the ball and it's tied, or maybe they're down a little bit and they have to go drive to tie or win the game. There's no running game really because there's only a couple minutes left and you've got to hurry up. You've got to keep throwing the ball so you can stop the clock. And so many games are decided by whether or not the quarterback makes the plays to go score and win, or he doesn't and they lose. Yeah. So even in some of those years where Wilson barely ever threw the ball, some of those years where Wilson was kind of a handoff machine, he won a lot of games at the end. The Rams, the Super Bowl run they just went on, their playoff run was powered by game-winning drives late in the fourth quarter with Stafford. And Stafford's not the best quarterback in the league, but he is definitely better than decent. He's better than like a Tannehill or a Kirk Cousins.
It's a fantastic point. Here's what I would say to that. You're right. We saw last year with Geno Smith, when the game was on the line, things can get maybe a little tight for him. With Russell, when the game was on the line, maybe he got a little bit loose at times and he got into more of his natural state. I will totally would give some ground on that and say that's a completely valid point. I might counter and say that means that you need to play from ahead. And there is going to be a little bit to a degree on this, Brendan, where there's no way around this. By Coach Carroll's type of ball, which is going to be run the ball, shorten games, limit the amount of possessions, you're going to have a lot more closer games because of that. But playing from ahead is really the pathway here. And the Niners have showed you this pathway in a similar way recently with a guy like Garoppolo. Play from ahead with marginal quarterback play, and you can still have a very good team. Do I expect it to be a Super Bowl run team? No, but to be to a team he's decent and he can get you into the back door of the playoffs, potentially. If those things fit up, I think they could under that. But you do have to, I agree with you. If you're playing from behind a lot in these games, if you can't generate anything offensively consistently or move the chains or keep your defense off the field, then it's going to get ugly really quick, especially if you get to that end game where you're having to get those drives in. If you could play ahead, get on top of teams, allow Coach Carroll's defense to play even more aggressive at that point because you're not worried about a given touchdown up on a big play, that I think can open more of that door to a little bit of the Niners formula and how they've done it with Jimmy there.
Yeah, we're a long way from that, though. There's only one Kyle Shanahan, and I don't believe that kind of thing grows on trees. So that's what it is to me. You need a quarterback not to throw the ball 60 times, not to throw for 800 yards, but you do need that quarterback who can go win the game at the end when it's close. Because so many games come down to that final drive. You can have the best defense. You can do all these great things on defense. There are going to be a lot of games where your quarterback, maybe you're ahead and your quarterback needs to put the game away by picking up a couple first downs. So to me, Geno's not good enough to do that reliably. Maybe he'll do it every now and then, but I look at that and I go, that's not good enough. Even if we built an amazing team around Geno, he would be good enough to keep us in the game, but not good enough to win them.
Do you think that when you make your assessment of Geno and we look at last year and say that this is like what you just said, he is where he is, when you make your assessment that he isn't able to be capable of being decent, that really we're talking a bottom run quarterback, 28th, 29th, 30th in this league. When you come to that assessment, are you coming to that assessment based on what he did with the Jets, on the fact nobody else has given them the opportunity, or on how he played last year?
I think it's a combination of all those things. Now, you can't put a ton of stock into what he did for the Jets because that was an eternity ago.
Yes.
I do think he played better with us last year. He avoided turnovers pretty well. He had two. One of them was when the play where Lockett either fell down or got tripped, depending on who you ask. I'm not putting that on him at all. But you still saw some of the same things where the offense just goes dead for an extended period of time. I don't think Geno played bad against Pittsburgh, but I don't know if we had more than one first down the entire first half. And that's something that doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet as bad, but it's something that kills your team. We had a 90-yard touchdown on the first drive against the Saints and then barely moved the ball after it. You look at Geno's stats, you're like, oh, he played okay, but no, not really. He didn't convert third downs. He didn't keep the chains moving. The defense kept going back out onto the field. I mean, this is kind of the problem I have with the box score. You look at the box score of some of these players, you're like, he's all right. But you watch the game and you're like, in terms of game flow, in terms of playing winning football, there's so much stuff the box score misses.
So how much do you factor into it, Geno, with some of that inconsistency, also like Russ dealing with the first year offensive coordinator, and that we talk about those first year returns not being there, and we give Russ rope, for instance, and say, we'll give you some time to development because your first true new offense in 10 years. Would we not give Geno some of that benefit of the doubt, and understanding that if we do give him that benefit of the doubt, and you look at last year, best completion percentage of his career, best touchdown to interception ratio of his career, best passer rating of his career, best QBR of his career, any major quarterback stat, he had the best of his entire career last year, while he was taking on a new offensive coordinator, while he was filling in from Russ on the run. You mentioned the turnovers, and the one interception he has is the one that I think, personally, I still think that should have been a pass interference call at the end of the game on that Rams. Shouldn't have even had the one interception he thrown. And really, again, we're not talking about him coming back and having to be great or good. The question kind of started this all off is, can he be decent? And I take those markers and I say, second year returns on an offensive coordinator, truly being given his second opportunity, which I don't think he's been given. And the counter to this seems to be from people of he should be good enough to win the job. Oh, he's going to walk into New York and Eli with his 352 straight starts, he's going to walk in there and just take over because even if he's better on the practice field, they'd make that choice with a coach, by the way, who's not very firmly affixed, who was going to get blowback if he made that decision. I don't hold that against him in that way. And I say this is his first true second chance to come back. He may be crap. But I think that there's more signs here of at least moving towards a decent stage rather than being that, what is he ranked by the Sims chart 40 or ranked in the 30 range? I don't think he's quite there. I think he's a little bit better than that. And I think being a little bit better than that might be just enough, again, to get you into maybe the back door of the playoffs or get you into more of a mediocre, state as a team.
I mean, I'll believe it when I see it. Like I said, a lot of the things you brought up, they're box score numbers and there's value there, but it doesn't fully capture how bad he was against the Saints. Like, we watched that game. He had one big play at the beginning, and then he may as well have just been a handoff machine the whole rest of the game for how useless he was. And that kind of thing does not get captured fully in the box score. So I am looking at last season and saying he played a little better than I thought he would, but I'm not looking at that and going, this is anything more than I know he's better than Nathan Peterman. God, he's better than Nathan Peterman. He's better than, what's the name of the guy with the really long neck? Mike Glennon.
Yes.
There we go.
Mike Glennon.
Yeah, I know he's better than those guys.
Okay, but again, how much weight do you put into that first year coordinator with him last year in the performance of again, knowing too well, by the way, this part you didn't mention with this, Rams, Saints, Steelers, all legitimate defenses. All you can make an argument in general terms, top 10, top 12 type defenses last year he was going with in those games. How much weight do you put into the fact he had that first year coordinator, as you've been a guy that has sped many times in the past? You have to be patient with the first year returns on a new coordinator. You've got to wait to that year 2 to get it. And where are you factoring that in on your judgment here on Geno, when I just told you again that he set those marks like he did with his career under those circumstances?
It means something, but what I would say is the thing with Russ was that his previous play style was antithetical to what Waldron was bringing in. It was almost the opposite. Wilson liked to throw the deep ball. Waldron was a short to intermediate guy, yak kind of guy. Russ barely ever used the middle of the field. Waldron was a guy who was bringing in an offense that was going to try to utilize the middle of the field more. I don't know if that's as much the case for Geno. And not that this necessarily means that it can't be done. I would wonder how many quarterbacks in NFL history were bad or backups in the first 9 years of their career, and then suddenly in year 10 they're a good starter. I asked this question in a video last month, and I was just trying to think about it. I was like, does that ever happen? Does any quarterback ever blossom in year 10?
Yeah. Well, I think it's also a little bit indicative of the fact that guys don't get second chances in this sport. You flame out once, there's not going to be a second team that eagerly steps up to the plate and says, we're willing to do this like Carson Wentz is getting the opportunities. He's getting multitude over and over again. That's not always the situation you run into. Sometimes you just get the one chance. And if you fail at it, then the narrative is cast and the die is set, and you're not going to get out of that backup stage of it, or you're going to have to wait a long period of time to do it. And yeah, you're right. It's anomalous in the respect of there's not been a lot of guys that have done it. But there was a quarterback in there that had a similar trajectory for the Raiders in the late 70s that brought them to a Super Bowl, who I'm sure if you talk to the fans of the first team that drafted him, said this guy's trash. He'll never be nothing. He can't be anything. And he went on to help the Raiders win a Super Bowl. There are probably a couple of examples. Again, it's not the rule of thumb. And I'm always a guy that doesn't harp on and say, count on the rule of thumb, count on the anomaly. I'll never do that. But I do think that there's more than just blind reason to look at the situation with Geno as it stands right now and to find some optimism there that he can be, again, the marker here is not to be Pro Bowl or to be an MVP level caliber quarterback. It's to get to a decent state of things. And you mentioned those games, tough defenses, weren't really able outside of, I think, maybe just the Steelers game to consistently run the ball in those tough starts that he had as well. So it was all kind of on his back offensively to perform at that point. I kind of put that all together from my standpoint and go, yeah, there is a reason here. I can get why people don't agree on it. I get why if you disagree a little bit slightly on it, but it's just where I land on saying this is how I think and why I think he can be decent, why he could be a somewhat middle of the road type quarterback for this team.
Yeah, the only way I could really see it happening would be if the offense just makes it so easy for the quarterback, like Waldron's in his bag, scheming receivers wide open, which we've talked about this before. The NFL is moving towards a model where offenses are all about winning pre-snap, so that post-snap it's easy. The players just have to not fall over. They're going to execute the play. If there's something like that, then maybe it can happen. But I don't think it's going to happen by his ability, his skill. So
no, I think he's just good enough to execute what you need him to do in this offense. You ask him to do too much, he's going to fail in it. You ask him to throw a high volume of passes, he's going to fail in that. I do think. But if you can fit him within a box and keep him protected a little bit, I think there can be some success out of that if there's other factors at play that are as good as I think they will be, specifically the run game, the defense, and special teams.
Zorn76, thank you for the $20. The legitimate rebuild starts with a new HC and FO in 2023. This season's purpose is to end up with a top 5 pick. Yeah. I've kind of had to push back on this thought in recent videos. I don't know if you disagree or not. I don't think there's any way Carroll or Schneider gets fired after this year. We could go 0-17 and I don't know if it would happen.
Nope. And it is something I see within people I talk to on the chat. I get where people are coming from. I know you, Zorn, I've talked to you very often on my chat too. I know where you're coming from on your standpoint and where your situation sits with this. And I get it. We could have us all screaming in this chat right and left, Brendan's whole chat, my whole chat, and shout to the top of our lungs. You are not going to get change, even if they're bad through this year. It's not happening. You got to just put that dream away right now. It's not happening. There's a lot of reasons for this. Number one, Carroll gets a built-in excuse this year of saying, I've got $45 million of dead money. Jody, you expected me to compete in that season. My quarterback forced his way out of town. You can't hold me responsible for that. The town would have sent us out on pitchforks if we had moved him, if we hadn't signed to that deal back in the day. We had to do it. And now you've seen the signs in this offseason of them relinquishing some power from Carroll, which Carroll can come back from again. Hey, you took some of my power away. It's going to take us a year to figure out and find our way. New coordinator. So I understand where you're coming from with it, Zorn. Say nothing of the fact that you're then have to pay the totality of Carroll's and Schneider's contract at that point, which, as I've spoken about again, Jody's got to put the trust in a liquidated state. So she's not going to be trying to come out of pocket. She does not want to hire a new coach at this point. So I get why people are coming from it, but we're going to see Carroll here for at the least in the next 2 years minimum.
Right. And I'm not thrilled about it. Don't get me wrong. This isn't me suddenly changing my mind about it. I will say I like that what we've done so far this offseason, by and large. I still look back at some of the mistakes made and I feel like something needs to happen, but that's not the direction we went. What we have right now is a team with, like you said, 45 million dead. We have a team with no quarterback. Even if you like Geno Smith a little bit, we might have the worst quarterback depth chart in the entire league. The most important position on any team, we might be in bottom one. I don't know if we are, but we could easily be. And honestly, if you're going to give a coach that situation and a front office that situation and then fire them when the results are bad, that's not really a good practice.
No,
that tells me that you're maybe getting a little too antsy firing these guys.
Well, and walk it through like this too. The conversation comes to Carroll this offseason, and Carroll discusses with Jody that we got to trade Russell Wilson. That means they get into some very interesting discussions that bear out of that at that point. And what he definitely, I'm sure, is bringing up to her at that point is, okay, if I'm going to have to move on from Wilson, which he's pushing us to do and may be the best thing for this franchise now moving forward, then you've got to understand this next year, we're not going to be pretty good. There's a good chance we might be bad. We might have to kind of turn this thing over. And if she's going to tell him at that time that this is a make or break year for you, Pete, do we think Pete's going to go through the final year of his career in a rebuild year and taking that chance and betting on himself with the quarterback situation where it is and where the roster is turning over where it is? I don't. I think at that point he says, no, instead what we'll do is we'll keep Russell. I'll go. You can bring in the new coach and I'll retire. That's a little bit more where I think Carroll would have gone with it. If that was on the, like you're saying, Zorn, if that was on the table for it to be a potentiality, for him to truly get fired after this year, if this doesn't go awry, I think that there would have been more of those kind of discussions. I think she's instead said, this is at least the next 2 year process. You're here. We'll give you the 2 years and then we'll make that assessment through then at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by the way, all that being said, I don't know why Carroll came out in that combine press conference insisting that the team was going to try to win. And we don't know how to rebuild. We don't even know what that means or whatever it was he said. Like, that is putting something unreasonable on him. But I guess he knows that the people who matter are not going to care about that. I will say, if the team is like worst in the league and they're getting blasted by 5 touchdowns every week and the stadium is 10% filled with people booing this team the whole game, maybe then it's just like, how can you keep him? If you're going to keep him at that point, it's like you're basically saying, we don't care about our fans at all. You're just going to, you're along for our ride. We're going to put out this terrible product. We don't care if you don't like it. Then maybe something happens, but that's not likely.
Yeah.
Teams don't do that. Like, the team would have to quit. The team would just have to say, we want Carroll to get fired. We're not going to play hard. We're going to lose every game by 5 touchdowns. That's what it would take, I think. And people don't usually do that.
No, and Carroll, I think, has a certain floor to the amount of wins he can, even if he just sort of just ekes them out, he'll still eke you out 4 or 5, 6 wins, even with a less than ideal roster. But I agree with you. If it did go maybe that far off the rails, Zorn, so if it goes completely off the rails, if the train just completely leaves the tracks, maybe that would be enough at that point. Like Brendan says, if they start seeing the stadium, partially filled, that would certainly at that point maybe push something along at that point. But I don't think us shouting and striving to say that there needs to be change will draw any kind of change just from that alone, if they're middling or they're showing signs of life.
Yeah. I think the line is the team would have to quit on Carroll. If the team quits on Carroll and decides we don't want to play hard for this old idiot anymore, then okay. But short of that, this is going to play out for at least a couple years. And I have mixed feelings on that, but it also is what it is. That doesn't mean it can't work.
Yeah. I mean, both me and Brendan were at the start, like, we're riding with Carroll. We're optimistic by the changes we're seeing, but both me and Brendan at the start of this whole process, this is off season, of course, Zone, at the beginning of this whole thing, we're like, look, if we're running the show, we probably are going to go back to Russell and build it with an offensive minded coach and build the offense around him. But that's not the direction that the franchise has chosen to take. And so this is the path that they're taking, and it is a choice. They've made the choice to go this direction. It's on Carroll, not Russell. And that means it's going to be more than just a 1-year process.
Chase Stern, thank you for the $20. How would you feel about drafting Tyler Van Dyke next year? I need to see more from him. I'm not sure.
I'm starting to. I mean, on the face of it, he can execute this kind of offense with the kind of throws, and he can do it well. There's a lot of inconsistency to his accuracy, which I don't understand, and I need to see improve with him. He doesn't provide you very much mobility, which I don't like the fact I'm drafting a quarterback in this modern era where I can't say he's got plus mobility. That's dicey to me. His arm is good, not great from an arm strength standpoint of things. He's got great touch. He's absolutely deadly in the red zone, Brendan. I mean, he's going to be a guy that's going to, when he gets to the pro level, probably have his offenses at a very high red zone percentage and what they're able to get done there, because he just makes such great passes. He knows exactly the amount of velocity or touch to make on those kinds. I'm talking about, like, if it's a touch throw or it's a jump ball throw, or he's got to put it in the back of the end zone on a line, but go across the field, across the hashes to do it. He's got a good feel of what he needs to make in those, and he just puts it pinpoint down there. In between the 20s, though, it's all over the place a little bit. So I need to see more from him. I'm open to it, but there's some trepidation for me.
Yeah, there's some guys I like a little bit more, and we got plenty of time to watch college games this year to figure out who asserts themselves. We don't need to stick with one guy right now.
Yeah, he's 5 on my list right now. He's my number 5.
All right, so let's start moving towards the conclusion here. I want to talk a little bit more about what we've heard from training camp so far that's kind of interesting. Other than the QB battle, which is going so far the way people expected. Geno's currently in the lead, but there's still time. Jake Curhan remains the starter for the moment over Abraham Lucas. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised, but I am expecting this to change at some point. Abe Lucas seems to me to be a guy who will fit the scheme better. He has much more upside than Curhan, who was a UDFA for a reason. So any thoughts on that battle?
It's not surprising he has the early lead. They're going to not probably put too much pressure on Lucas. And certainly I think the team, if it's tendency out the gates to lean towards, well, maybe we have one starting rookie tackle rather than 2, and just the built-in problems that can build in. With that said, at the end of the day, Lucas, I think, is going to become undeniable, like you, in it being his job. And that I like Curran. It's not to toss shade at him. It's just it's more about how much I like Lucas than it is about the least amount that I like with Curran. And if Curran comes in and balls out, and he's been in the weight training room all off season and working on his sets and working on his technique, and he's just been that guy that's that dedicated, and he's better right now and wins out over Abe, then that's a great problem to have at that point, isn't it? That's depth. It's quality. Good problem.
Yeah, I like Kurhana. He was a cool story last year. He was one of the few things about the team that was fun.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
It was
and
not a
absolutely
fun year.
No, and surprising. None of it. We didn't see it with him. We had other UDFAs that we were much higher on. He was a guy that it was just kind of a guy that you saw on the roster, just a guy. And instead, he came in and really balled out from that right tackle position when he was called upon. And I've the best undrafted rookie free agent we've had here in quite a bit of time, in bursting onto the scene as he did.
Right, because even like Jermaine Kearse didn't do really much of anything that first year, right?
No, I think 6 catches or something in his first year. He probably
Yeah,
played
something
like
like
a
that.
handful of games.
So maybe the best since Doug Baldwin. No, Thomas Rawls was UDFA, wasn't he? I think he was.
Yes, because I'm confusing it with Chris. So yes, he was a UDFA. I'm going, no, he's 6'7". Nope, he was a UDFA. So that was probably the best one. Yeah, that was the best.
Okay.
That was the best one. But outside of Thomas Rawls and Doug, throughout this time period, I can't think of. You got Ricardo Lockett, and that's about it there. So
yeah,
right there.
That sounds about right to me. One positive that's come out of training camp so far is how good our cornerbacks look. Both days, I've actually heard positive things about the cornerbacks. So let's talk about this for a second, because there's going to be some negativity around the team right now. Like, the offense doesn't look good overall so far. Gino and Locke both looked on day one and a little better today, supposedly. So let's talk about the cornerbacks here real quick. Sidney Jones had a pick. Let's see here. Tariq Woolen's actually made a couple plays on the ball already. And I'm pretty much giving Tariq Woolen the red shirt this year. So I'm just going to be looking for him to do things in practice, because it's not going to be in real games. Kobe Bryant had a nice play where he got beat a little bit by Marquise Goodwin, but recovered and actually broke it up. And I believe Artie Burns, currently a starter with the defense right now, has also impressed. So cornerback room looking pretty decent.
Yeah, I was nice to see Carroll again note too that how well Kobe's ball skills have stood out. Where you've had corners here at times through the years outside of Richard Sherman and maybe Byron Maxwell and Browner that aren't always, they can be there in the right position, but can't turn around and make the play. And both with Kobe and Tariq Woolen being a former receiver convert, you have that now. And so Carroll noting his ball skills have jumped out even early on, and you notice it, and he can make a play on the ball is I think interesting. I think he's a guy that if you get him on the field, he will give you some picks on top of playing good ball. He won't just Shaquille Griffin it. You know what I mean? Artie Burns, not surprising there. He's got the most familiarity with this Desai Vic Fangio scheme on the back end. So him coming in, he'll know some of the intricacies right out the gate that are going to take not only just first-year players in the scheme, but rookies to adapt to. So not surprising there. You and I are both high as can be on Sidney Jones. He's gotten better every single year of his career. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see him come out there and ball out this year, get 4 or 5 interceptions. Maybe not be a true lockdown corner up there, but be an upper level corner from his side of the field in what he's doing. I think he's finally getting the full totality of his athleticism and speed back that was robbed on that torn Achilles that he suffered on his pro day. And it just has evidence. Like his PFF, it's weird, Brendan. You look at his PFF, it's like tink, 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 tink every year. Tink, 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 tink. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of M. Night Shyamalan's
exactly
career.
It's exactly the inverse.
The rating just kept going down.
Yeah. Less starts with a classic. Oh, that was very good. Kind of middle of the road. Yep. It's the inverse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It kind of does. I kind of wish that Sidney Jones deal ended up being for 2 years instead of 1. That would have. I'm fine with it because this team is pretty good at finding cornerbacks most of the time. But I kind of wish that was a 2-year deal, so that way he could have been part of whatever we end up building in 2023, which has a chance to be pretty good.
Agreed. I wouldn't have been opposed to it. I would have been open to it. And it's probably as much Sidney was probably saying, let me bet on myself here, right? Where he says that the cap's going up and I had a good year last year and I'm playing my best ball. If I go out and get 3 or 4 interceptions, I'll get that 13, 14 million a year deal. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that they might have been offering the 2 year, but he said, no, I'm ready to roll now. I'm finally good to take on. I think that's the other thing. If you sign him to the 2-year deal and he goes out and gets you 5 interceptions and he's looking at a $5 million salary the next year, he might very well at that point demand that you fix it.
Yeah, that is actually a really good point. Nobody honors contracts anymore. So what's the point?
No, it's the new view that I'm trying to adjust in my lens of this and how I look at it, and taking less from we've got this guy for that. Or like the thing that you hear Brendan on the first round picks. This is the thing that I'm going to start to push very hard back on. Well, he's a first round pick, so we have the 5 years of club control. Shut up. No, you don't. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't. You have 3 years of club control, period. End of story. And that's sorry, go ahead.
No. And if you have more, it comes back to bite you because then the player doesn't feel obligated to give you a break.
Right. Exactly. So we got to stop looking at it as a benefit or as a value into, well, you want this with the first round guy you get that extra. No. Well, he's a 20 year, you get him in the 24th, 25th in the first round, but then you have you don't have those fourth and fifth years. And it's instrumental. And you look at these deals prior now, understanding it's through 3 years, because that's going to affect the value, not only in what you trade to give up with first round picks, but also in what you get back. Probably a little bit of the reason the Rams, and being a forward thinking organization like they have been so willing to give up those picks, because they look at it maybe through that lens of these are just 3 year deals. They're not 5 years we're getting here.
Yeah, I still think draft picks have a lot of value because
they do.
The players are so cheap. But I mean, the Rams made good draft picks to build this thing, right? They drafted Cooper Kupp, they drafted Aaron Donald. They did do some things to build up that team before they went all in on the crazy trades.
Very much so.
You know,
I'm not anti first. It's just how we weight and value them, right? Mm-hmm. That's as much anything. And that if you're weighting and valuing it a little bit more and giving it a little more of that girth because of the fact it's the 4th and the 5th year, that's the part where I say we got to pull that back when we look through these deals now is just the 3, however it is, whether we're offloading or bringing on those kind of selections.
Yeah. I mean, there was a point 12 years ago where high first round picks almost had negative value because it was you would have to give them a top of the market deal as a rookie. Jamarcus Russell, Sam Bradford both got ridiculous amounts of money, and it went badly. So at that point, it was almost like you didn't even want the number 1 pick because it
top
was just,
5.
Yeah. You didn't want the top 5 picks. Thankfully, we've resolved that now. But I do remember that time when it was like you just want to find somebody you can trade down with at that point.
You're right. Those were the highest paid players when they were being signed at their positions as those young picks. They were making more than the top end guys at their positions, and the quarterback especially. And the players figured it out and changed it in the CBA. But yeah, that used to be the way it was. And that value is still built in because of that change, Brendan, that you mentioned. That's why they are still valuable, is that while they still do cost a little bit, like your top 5 pick now is going to cost you $9-10 million a year on your cap, even in the first year hit. Like they're starting to get kind of expensive, but there's still a value there. It's not something that I don't say. It's all in the weighted measurement. And I see people at times, they'll put a lot of extra weight because, well, you got that 2 extra years, especially with quarterbacks. Oh, well, you get him within that first round pick, and then you get those extra 2 years of club control. And that's huge. It's huge. No, it's kind of small. Because one way or another, quarterback, ask the Arizona Cardinals about their 5 years of Kyler Murray club control.
Yeah, unless he forgets to do his laundry or take out the trash one week.
Wasn't that hilarious? Dude? It was fun to laugh at that, man. I had enjoyed it.
Yeah, what were they thinking putting that in there, man?
Well, it keeps getting worse because number one, you're wrong for putting it in there. You're wrong for having it leak. You're wrong now for removing it out of the contract because of the blowback you've received publicly. It just keeps being one of those situations they keep digging deeper on, Brendan. And I don't understand exactly why they did in the first place, but it also speaks to, Brendan, we're going to have a show at some point where we talk about this on its own subject. And that's that we're talking about revaluing first round picks, revaluing the quarterback position, because we've got to start looking at this thing through what it is now versus what it's been in the past. And what it's like I said, with the 3 years of club control on quarterbacks, with the fact that when you pay these guys, it's so much harder to build out the rest of your roster. It's going to be worthy of a discussion, I think, someone with us in getting to the depths of this, if maybe the more forward-thinking model here is to go a different route.
Yeah. I actually made a video about this. I believe the way this ends. Yeah. I believe the way that it ends is that there are enough good quarterbacks to where you can just go, okay, this guy wants too much money. I can go get this guy and he can win games too. Right now, there are not enough good quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Like you've got a guy like Jalen Hurts, who is very inaccurate. The Eagles are still at least considering betting their long-term future on his ability to win games because there just aren't enough really good quarterbacks out there. But you're looking at this upcoming draft class that looks really good for quarterbacks. If enough of those guys pan out and you have a few more draft classes like that, you can start to get to a point where it's like, okay, the quarterbacks have been forcing teams to bid. Now we're going to start going the other way now, where the quarterbacks are almost bidding on teams, where it's a race to the bottom.
I could see it on that. I could see that making up a big part of it. And then another small part of it being more of teams looking towards how they can build towards the totality of the team versus the quarterback having to be the centerpiece of everything, and refining that model down, a model that you've seen the Niners and Titans utilize, but find a way to do it even better if that's possible in your approach to it. And again, this is more of where the game would go forward thinking on that, but that would also be what I would say with this. Less of, yeah, you need a quarterback that can run the day. Like you said, at the end of the day, you'll be down by points and you need a guy to make a drive when you need to make a drive. But if you also build the team appropriately around a certain type of quarterback, and like I see with our Seahawks here, bring a pro-ready guy in. You know, that's why we love Levis so much, is he's really pro-ready. He's ready to hit that ground running, and you get the most out of him quickly, especially if we're only getting him through that 3-year period to get the most out of him. Mm-hmm. But I also think that's the works in tandem as well, is rather than teams shorthanding and rather than having to be smart and very, very careful in their moves to build out the right roster, instead, now that they can all shorthand it, well, we got our quarterback, so we got our chance. Instead, no, you do the hard thing. You build out the rest of the roster around that guy, which is the hard thing. It's the hard approach. It's the unorthodox. But that's the one where I do wonder, Brendan, if that can't not be maybe a little bit of where the game evolves to in the long term, especially with what you say on the plethora of quarterbacks who suddenly now are injected into the league.
Yeah, it's definitely something worth talking about. It's getting a little crazy right now. I mean, this offseason was kind of all about it. Aaron Rodgers is about to turn 39, but they still gave him all that money. Deshaun Watson hasn't played football in a year and still has 8 billion dark clouds on the horizon, just waiting to, make it so he misses another season. And you knew it. You still gave him all that money. Kyler Murray has a losing record as a starter, hasn't won a playoff game, and you gave him all that money too. It goes to show you that these quarterbacks can get whatever they want.
That's it. They're dictating the situation, which to me does not spell a team running it, driving their process. A player's driving their process. And that's at that point where, to me, that's where you start to go wrong. And it's not going to surprise me now as the Cardinals struggle to build a team around Kyler Murray, nor will it surprise me if they end up in the cellar even this year, because of the fact that this is where it gets hard, man. And I think teams have gotten lazy. Teams have gotten scared that if they let go of their quarterback, that they'll get so much blowback and then they'll get fired and all that. But as I always say, again, I come back to moves made out of desperation and fear are moves that are quickly proven wrong and the bad choice that you've made. And I think Seahawks would be very smart and wise here to be setting themselves up from a position of looking at this team through building a team and trying to lean into where it evolves in that state of things, especially a team as committed to running the ball as they are, who doesn't need a high volume passing attack, especially in that stadium, which plays in inclement weather a large amount of the time. Build towards that and try that as a different approach. Everybody else is going this way. Everybody else going that way. Be the one. We want to few the teams that goes the other direction, because it could bring out a lot of benefits.
Yeah, I think we are headed to where the Ravens are going to do it, and I think the Niners should do it. I don't know if they will. They didn't really do it with Garoppolo, and I think they deeply regret that. They absolutely could have made those playoff runs with Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Mm-hmm. Or if they'd just gone to the young quarterback in the draft at that time, be it a guy that was maybe not the top end quarterbacks, but a guy that was a middle of the road guy, and rode with him instead, who could have executed Shanahan's offense, being asked to, again, I'm asking my guy to throw 13 times, 20 times, 25 times a game. That's a reduced degree of difficulty to a high realm versus the guy having to throw 40 times, because there's less of the not just the less attempts, but also the less money plays that you've used up, right? You can use a lot of those money plays up there. They're the easy completions I talked about. And now you're back turning it over like the third time you've gone through a lineup in baseball, where there's that diminishing returns aspect to it now as you go through deep in the game. So I think it does make it a little easier with that. And I think, Shanahan has shown you with the way they've gone with this Garoppolo and the Trey Lance situation, I should have done this instead on the side of it. I should have just gone for the guy that can do certain things I need him to do in this offense that Garoppolo can't do. And we're paying the price to have him not do it.
Paul Thurr, thank you for the $5. Thinking about putting money on Mafe for D Rookie of the Year. I can get 61-1 odds here in Australia. You think he can flash in the first 10 games on the schedule? Well, 61-1's pretty juicy, but I'm a big Mafe fan. I like him a lot. He was one of my favorite players in this draft. I was over the moon we got him. I don't know if I see him playing a lot and doing a lot as a rookie. I think he's a little raw. I think that he's a little bit of a work in progress, not expecting huge things as a rookie. So
I can't add a lot on top of what Brendan just said with this, Paul, because I kind of follow in the same place. He is a little bit raw. He's fairly new to football. So that's why that rawness is there, despite his age being a little bit older as a prospect. Inconsistent on film. When it's on, it's amazing and beautiful, but when it's off, it can get a little bit ugly at times. I think that this is going to cause them to try to limit his snaps and find a role for him. And if they're just finding him a role where he's a pass rush extraordinaire, that's a 4.5, 5 sack season on the top end of things, which is not going to get you a defensive rookie of the year bid, especially remember, Paul, Aiden Hutchinson, the kid Jaguars drafted. You got a couple of corners coming out of this last draft. There's a lot of defensive rookie of the year candidates here that make it, Jordan Davis. There's some guys out there that might do some things. So I think it's going to be too much of an uphill battle. I wouldn't even on a low end take that bet, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. So I think that pretty much wraps up everything we can talk about. We think we went over all the interesting stuff, all the fun stuff. So one more thing before we sign off today, I want to ask you about just a little fun extra thing. Do you want Juan Soto?
No, I land on a no with Juan Soto. The main reason is that, and really now I've been streaming some games on my side, on my Crow's Nest side of this, and I've been watching them anyway, but when you really start paying attention, talking about it, the thing that jumps out to me in that baseball stadium as much as anything, as far as any kind of identity of the Mariner baseball stadium, is that outfield through the 20 years and how much space those guys have to cover. And when you had 3 dogs defensively in that outfield, Ichiro, Randy Wynn, and Mike Cameron, 3 guys that were literally top 3 in defense in their position, if not the number 1 overall defenders at their position, there were no balls that found any gaps in that defense. They cut everything down, and it's harder to measure, right? Because you can't always, it doesn't count on the scoreboard. It doesn't fit as a stat. You can look at advanced defensive metrics and you'll see it, but you don't see it on the box score of a game. So it's hard for fans to measure. And the thing with Juan Soto is while the bat is really good, the defense is a little bit questionable for him. And then when I come into the fact that I'm not going to get him on a contract extension, but that I only get 2 years of cheap club control for him at that point, that to me makes me go, that's not enough returns there for what I'm going to have to give up, which they're talking about the haul of a lifetime here. Kelnick, Marte, Hancock, maybe more, maybe a major leaguer. I think
Kirby.
Rather than Kirby, I mean, it's, and I look at it and I go, that's just too much for just two years of cheap club control for a guy that, again, if he was marvelous defensively and he had the bat, maybe we can get talking here, but I can't bring on a guy that I've got some limitations for, that's only going to be here for 2 years. That's part of what the Mariners have done prior that's gotten them in trouble with getting a stunt to the development of their farm system with some of those trades they've made. To me, starting pitcher, because Kirby's on a pitch count, you're going to shut him down eventually here. He's not going to be able to go all the way through, so you need a starting pitcher. And then beyond that, if you can find, somebody maybe for second base to me, but at the end of the day, you got to kind of ride with what you got returned to this lineup. Mitch Haniger, getting Lewis back to front, we're getting consistent at bats, get him back in the lineup. And I think Lewis will be an upgrade from what you got defensive to DH wise. The key here for me, Brendan, is your left field's hitting like 230 and 8 home runs. Your DH is in a similar state. If you can get guys hitting 270, 280 with some reasonable power numbers, that's going to upgrade this lineup significantly all on its own. And there's reason to think it because Mitch and Lewis have proven when they can consistently be put in a lineup, they can hit. So I think that's where it comes from. How about you?
Yeah. I'm not into it. I'm not into it. I feel like we learned from the Angels. You can have the 2 best players in the league and still be a bad team. That's not how the problem with the Mariners this year, for the most part, has not been like, oh, we need a superstar. No, we need somebody who isn't Dylan Moore coming up with the bases loaded in the 8th inning when we're down by a run. Like,
but they're just pathetic at bats, right? There's some at bats you watch with this team where you're saying some guys are good, fine, but there's other guys in the lineup where you go, that's an awful at bat. You're not doing anything. You're not challenging the pitcher. You're not taking pitchers. You're swinging early. You don't have any power with like Dylan Moore or some of these other guys that, you've got to just improve that a little bit. And this team will take monumental steps forward because they're already being successful off of what they had with these deficiencies in the lineup.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I think like the Angels are proving it, you'd rather have a deep team than a team with 2 superstars and not a whole lot else. It's too easy to pitch around Ohtani and Trout because you can get behind them and then good luck. What
if you could do it as a deal where you don't have to, and I'm still with you on this. I'm putting this out there. Okay. So what if you could do it as a deal where you give up Marte, Kelnick, Hancock as your 3 centerpieces of the deal, and then fill in players around that, be it maybe a major leaguer here and then other guys, without touching Kirby or Gilbert, without touching Julio on it? Would that get you potentially a little more?
Yeah, that's a more appealing. What I would say, though, is that we're about to desperately need second base help because Frazier is just, He's a rare zero tool player.
Yes, that's a good point. Very, very, very much so. Maybe some decent defense, but other than that, that's about all I
He's
give
got
him.
good defense in the outfield. He's not a good second baseman defensively. I've seen him flub like little league plays, but then you're giving up prospects, and prospects, some work out, some don't. So
yeah, I definitely think second base is the long-term, place to look at to improve this team to where they can look in the future. And Marte, you eventually probably just move him to third base. That's what you do if you have Crawford embedded there at shortstop. Just take Marte to third, and now he's tearing the cover off the ball. So he's on a pretty fast track right now to get himself to the pros if that's what you chose to do. Because Eugenio will be out of contract within 2 years anyway. So that's probably the better long-term kind of approach. But I'm Team Castillo, man. Cincinnati pitcher. I'm Team Castillo.
Yeah. Apparently we were thinking about Bieber too. Shane Bieber.
I'm okay with that. Okay with that. I just add another arm. That's what we need at this point, I think.
All right. So thank you everybody for coming out. We had close to 300 people at one point tonight. Still up over 200. Thank you everybody for coming out. It was a lot of fun. We're definitely going to do this weekly going forward because next week is actually the start of the preseason.
There we go.
We're actually going to have something to watch. Not a great first preseason game, but we're going to have more stuff to dive into.
Important, if not great, but it will be, every snap will be important. I think you got another dono there, by the way, too. You might have missed one dono.
Did I? Oh, yeah. Garth Knight, thank you. Again, Nightbot is legit. He's on the board at Wu-Tang Financial, so he can be trusted. Hey, Nightbot is reliable, man. He's always there for you.
That's right. I got to put my Nightbot. I don't have a Nightbot. I need to get my Nightbot.
Yeah, it's good to have a bot pop in with messages every now and then. But yeah. All right. So thank you everybody for coming out. It was a fun show. Thank you to Brandon for coming out as well.
My pleasure. Had a great time as always.
I will do it again on his channel next week. And before we head out, we got to say it. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.